Before we dive into today's journey, have you ever experienced something strange while out camping? Share your story in the comments below, and let's build this haven of eerie campfire tales together. There's a silence you only hear in places people have long since given up on. Not peaceful, not serene, but raw, unwelcoming. Like the land remembers what was taken from it and waits patiently for you to trespass. That's the silence I drove into that September afternoon in Idaho. Engine humming soft in my '83 Volkswagen Westphalia, tires crunching over frostbitten pine needles and broken gravel. The road ended before the map said it should. But I kept going. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than a quiet solo trip. After a brutal summer of divorce papers and closed doors, I needed solitude, not sympathy. The kind of solitude only the forest can give, when even your own voice feels too loud. I was 38, just a guy looking for somewhere to sleep, maybe fish. But that campground, Cold River Rest. I'll never forget the name, etched into a moss-choked wooden sign hanging crooked between two splintering posts. People said it had been shut down for years. Fires, accidents, lawsuits. Locals avoided it. Didn't say much about it either, which should have told me more than it did. But back then, I was still stubborn. Still believed danger wore a face or carried a knife. Not that it might wait in a rustling tree line or a quiet cough in the dark. That's the thing about fear. Real fear. It doesn't shout. It watches. It waits. It lets you laugh around your campfire, pretending you're safe until the woods answer back. I rolled through what was left of the entrance, nothing but a rusted-out cattle gate half torn from its hinges, and followed the rutted trail deeper. Sunlight barely touched the forest floor. The canopy hung thick overhead, ancient pines crowding in close like they were trying to push you back the way you came. But I found a clearing, flat, dry, surrounded on three sides by trees and a slow-bending creek. My kind of place. I parked, popped the top of the Westie, and let the engine click into silence. That first night should have been perfect. The air was crisp, the stars punched through a violet sky, and the creek made a gentle hush like the world's breath slowing down. I grilled a little trout I'd brought, sipped some cheap whiskey, and tried to feel human again. I even laughed once, real, from the gut kind of laugh, when a squirrel nearly fell from a branch trying to get at my granola. But somewhere around midnight, I woke up cold. Not the kind of cold you can throw a blanket over. This was bone deep, like the air itself had thinned out. The fire had died to ash. My lantern had clicked off, and the silence, it had changed, like the whole forest had stopped breathing. Then I heard it, a voice. Just one. It was faint, too faint to be clear, but it was close. So close it might have been standing just outside the van. I sat up slow, held my breath, and waited. Nothing. I unzipped the sleeping bag, grabbed the flashlight, and peeked out the window. No movement, no sound. But my gut twisted with a dread I couldn't place. I know what you're thinking, probably just an animal, maybe even a dream. And I told myself the same thing, but something in me had already shifted, a flicker of an instinct I hadn't felt since I was a kid in New Mexico, waking up to coyotes circling the house. That primal awareness. Something is near. I locked the doors. It was the only time I'd done that while camping. Something about it made me feel even more alone. The next morning came bright, cold, and crisp. You'd never guess the night had held anything other than stars. I checked around the site, no tracks, no trash, nothing disturbed. I told myself it had just been a dream, born out of exhaustion and whiskey. But I didn't stay long in the van that day. I felt better out in the open. Watched the creek, followed a deer trail, took photos of weird moss patterns on the rocks. I kept noticing these markings carved into tree trunks, deep, straight cuts like tally marks, but I figured they were from surveyors or maybe hunters. It didn't seem odd at the time. By dusk, I'd almost convinced myself I was fine. Almost. But that night, the voice came back, louder this time, clearer. Still just one. This time it said a word. It said, "Stop." And I did. Stopped breathing, stopped blinking. Just stood there in the dark, bare feet against the cold dirt, trying to decide if I'd finally lost my mind. I shined the flashlight out across the trees. The beam wavered on the tall trunks, caught in the mist curling low around the campsite. "Who's there?" I called out. No answer, no movement. But then I noticed something I hadn't before. The fire pit I'd used, the one I'd cleared out myself, was gone. Not just cold or scattered, gone, like it had never existed. The ground was smooth, undisturbed, like no one had camped there in years. I backed toward the van, light sweeping back and forth, heart pounding. Then something sharp stabbed through my foot. I looked down. A rusty nail, bent, sticking out of a piece of rotted wood buried in the dirt. I yanked it out with a curse, limped into the van, and slammed the door. Blood was already soaking into my sock. I cleaned it, wrapped it, but my hands shook so bad I dropped the tape twice. Then outside the van I heard it again, but this time it wasn't a voice. It was laughter, not loud, not hysterical, low, deliberate, and close. Right outside. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, flashlight in one hand, wrench in the other, and stared at the door. Morning took forever. When the light finally came, it brought fog with it, dense, white, clinging to everything like cobwebs. I opened the door slowly, every muscle in my body braced for something. I didn't know what, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no voices, just the trees, the creek, and the cold. And where my van had been parked, it wasn't level anymore. The left side had sunk, deep. I walked around and saw it. A hole, not a pit, not a trench, a grave. A rectangular cavity, 4 feet wide, 6 feet long, dug perfectly into the ground where my left tires had sunk. Fresh dirt surrounded it. No shovel, no tool marks, just the grave. Waiting. I got in the van and turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then went silent. Dead. Battery shouldn't have been dead. I hadn't used anything that long, but it was dead. I don't panic easy. I've dealt with break-ins, storms, a flipped kayak once. But this? I was standing next to what looked like my own grave in a place I was told was abandoned with no signal, no power, and something whispering to me from the trees. And somehow I wasn't surprised. Like a part of me had been expecting this all along. I didn't move for a while, just stood there beside the van, staring at that perfect rectangle of earth, feeling the world contract around me. Every sound seemed muffled by the fog, every breath heavy and stale like the air had gone bad. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, erosion, animal activity, whatever, but no version of that made sense. Not the shape, not the depth, and sure as hell not the timing. My breath came sharp, short. I dropped to my knees and started clawing at the dirt around the grave, needing proof it wasn't what I thought it was. But the soil was clean, no bones, no cloth, just damp earth recently turned. I didn't know who dug it. I didn't know if it was for me, but I knew I had to leave, even if I had to walk. I grabbed my pack, stuffed what I could into it, a few bottles of water, a flare, my first aid kit, a roll of gauze, and the old hunting knife my dad gave me when I was 15. The rest I left. Food, cooking gear, the extra blanket. If I couldn't get the van running, none of it mattered. I slammed the van door and looked out at the tree line. Still no movement, still no sound. And yet I felt watched. Not the casual awareness of being stared at. This was sharper, like something had its eyes on me for hours, memorizing how I breathed, how I blinked, how I moved. I could almost feel it urging me deeper into the trees, pulling me. But I turned toward the road I came in on, or what was left of it. And that's when I noticed it. The tire tracks. Mine. But wrong. There were 2 sets of them. My Westie's tread is easy to recognize. Those vintage tires leave a pattern like nothing else. One trail came in, the one I remembered, but the other trailed off into the woods at an angle I didn't recognize. Deeper. Farther from the road. And fresh. It looked like I had driven into the trees in the night. But I hadn't moved the van. I know I hadn't. I felt dizzy, like the ground shifted under me. I turned back toward the van just to anchor myself, and that's when I saw it. The window. Driver's side. A smear of something across the inside of the glass. At first I thought it was condensation. Then I looked closer. Handprints. Not just one, a dozen. Maybe more. Small. Child-sized. Smeared. Layered. Like they'd been placed over and over in the same spot. I dropped my pack, Ran to the door, yanked it open, nothing inside, but the air, it was wrong. Heavy with the smell of wet dirt and something older, like old blood and burnt hair. I dry heaved, then slammed the door again. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not another second. I left the van behind, followed my original tracks out, forcing myself to ignore the others veering into the trees. I walked fast at first, then faster, then full out, but the forest didn't open up. If anything, it got tighter, thicker. I should have hit the gravel road by then. It wasn't that far, but the trees kept going, and going, and going. That sick feeling in my gut, the kind that only comes when you know something's not just wrong, but unnatural, tightened with every step. I looked up through the trees for a break in the canopy. Nothing. Just thick branches pressing together like fingers. I pulled my phone from my pocket, not for service, just to check the compass. The needle spun. No north, no direction. Just a shaking hand holding dead plastic in a world that didn't want me finding my way out. I stopped walking, listened. No birds, no wind, just the distant sound of water. The creek, but it was coming from the wrong direction. Behind me. I turned, looked back, and saw it, the van, through the trees. 50 feet away, I hadn't turned around, I hadn't backtracked. I'd walked straight. I know I had. But there it was, same exact spot, same bent nail lying beside the driver's side wheel, same grave yawning open beside it, and worse, the side door? It was open now, wide, dark inside, like it had been waiting. My chest burned. I didn't know if I was panicking or hallucinating. I dropped to my knees, tried to breathe, tried to think. But the forest was crawling with something just under the surface. Not animals, not insects. Intent. Like I'd wandered into a place with rules older than language, and breaking them had consequences. That's when I heard the whistling. Soft, almost musical, coming from the creek. Not a tune I recognized. It was tuneless, more like the idea of a song than a real one. It rose and fell like a lullaby, but off. Wrong. The way children hum when they don't know the words. I turned slowly and saw her, a girl, maybe 10 years old, filthy, pale, standing barefoot in the creek like the cold didn't touch her. Her hair was soaked and knotted, her eyes too wide, too still. She wasn't moving, just staring at me, whistling. I tried to speak, to ask who she was, where her parents were, but no sound came out. And then from behind me, I heard another whistle. I turned again. Another child, a boy this time, then another and another, all dressed in clothes decades out of date, all pale, still, and all whistling the same song. The clearing filled with them, silent, staring. I backed toward the van, toward the only shelter I had, but when I turned, it was gone. The van, gone, just trees now, thick, silent. The children still stared, still whistled, and slowly they began to move, not running, not lunging, just walking toward me. From every side, I ran, blinded by panic, branches cutting my face, mud in my shoes. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just knew I had to get away. But no matter how far I ran, the forest never changed. Same trees, same silence, same feeling like the ground itself was trying to swallow me. Until finally, mercifully, I saw it. A light, faint, flickering, like a fire, like camp. I didn't hesitate. I crashed through the brush, fell twice, scraped my hands, tore my jeans, but I reached it, and there it was, a new clearing with an old fire pit and a Volkswagen Westfalia, my Volkswagen, parked exactly as before, door wide open, like it never moved, like it had waited. It shouldn't have been possible. I stood at the edge of the clearing, lungs burning, legs trembling, sweat freezing on the back of my neck, and there it was. My van, same license plate, same scratched paint where I'd bumped it against a gas pump in Missoula. Even the dent in the side mirror from that night in Big Sur when I'd clipped a low-hanging branch. No doubt about it, and the side door was still open, gaping like a mouth. It didn't make sense. I'd just run a mile, maybe more, straight, blind. There was no way I could have circled back, unless I'd never left. I took a cautious step forward, my boots squelched in the soft earth. The air around the van was still dead quiet. No birds, no wind. Just the sound of my own heartbeat trying to leap out of my chest. Then something moved. Inside the van, a slow shift, like someone changing their weight on the cushions. I froze. My hand instinctively went to the knife at my belt. I hadn't drawn it yet. I hadn't wanted to. But now it felt like the only real thing I had left. I called out, my voice hoarse. "Hello?" Nothing. I took another step. "I don't want any trouble," I said. "I'm just passing through." Still nothing. And then another movement, closer to the edge of the seat. A silhouette. Small. Wrong. I stepped back. "No," I whispered. No, because I knew what I was seeing now, what I hadn't wanted to admit earlier. It was a child, sitting inside my van, feet swinging just above the floor. But it wasn't the girl from the creek. This one had no face, just skin, smooth and unbroken. A blank oval where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. It tilted its head toward me, slowly listening somehow without ears. And the sound that came from it wasn't a whistle, it was breathing. Wet. Labored. Too deep for lungs that small. I stumbled back, nearly fell, and that's when I heard the others. Footsteps. Dozens of them. Crunching through the underbrush. I turned and saw the children emerging from the tree line again. All of them. Surrounding the clearing. Their pale skin nearly glowing in the dark. They didn't speak, didn't make a sound. They just stared like they were waiting for me to go inside. Like that was the price of escape. The faceless one slid off the bench inside the van, and the whole vehicle creaked slightly under the movement, just enough to make it feel real, tangible. I could still hear my keys in the ignition, my gear in the back, my flannel draped over the driver's seat. I thought, if I get in, do I get to leave? Or do I never leave at all? The whistling started again, but this time it came from inside the van, not from the trees. I couldn't breathe. My body was frozen, caught between instinct and paralysis. I thought about my dad again, how he used to say, "Never run from something you don't understand. You might be running toward it." But staying felt worse. I had no options, so I turned, not toward the van, but toward the fire pit in the center of the clearing. It was cold, long dead, nothing but ash and damp charcoal, but I dropped to my knees beside it and reached into my pack with shaking fingers. Pulled out the flare. My last shot. I struck it hard. Once, twice. It caught. The sudden pop and searing red glow cut through the night like a gunshot. The children flinched. The faceless one stopped mid-step. I held the flare high, its heat almost too much to bear, and for the first time in hours, I felt like I had power. Real power. Like I could push this place back. The children didn't move closer. They held their ground, watching. I backed slowly toward the far edge of the clearing, sweeping the flare in wide arcs. The shadows danced wildly across the trees, bending the shapes into unnatural curves, but nothing followed. I made it to the path, turned, ran. This time I didn't get lost. The trees opened. The road appeared, and at the far end, a single green highway sign caught the flare's dying glow. U.S. Route 12, 2 miles. I ran until my legs collapsed under me. I woke up in the dirt sometime after sunrise. The flare was long dead. My hands were covered in soot and blisters. The pack had been torn open, contents strewn across the roadside like someone had searched it. But I was alive, and more importantly, back in the world. The forest behind me looked smaller in the daylight, harmless even, but I didn't believe that for a second. I could still feel its breath on the back of my neck. I walked the rest of the way to Route 12 and flagged down a logging truck just after noon. The driver didn't ask questions, just gave me a thermos of coffee and stared straight ahead. I never went back for the van, didn't even report it stolen. What would I say? "Hi, officer. My camper's parked in a pocket of haunted forest where the children never speak and sometimes don't have faces." No one would believe it. But I know what I saw, and every now and then, I still dream of it. That clearing, that grave, that thing in my van. But what stays with me more than anything is the feeling that it wasn't just me who stumbled into something ancient. It wanted me there. It needed someone. Maybe that's why the road curved the way it did. Maybe that's why the gas station attendant was so quick to tell me about the abandoned site. Maybe I wasn't the first, and I sure as hell won't be the last. So if you're reading this, if you're planning a trip through Idaho in your Volkswagen, looking for the freedom of the open road, the solitude of the woods, be careful where you camp. If a site looks too peaceful, too quiet, too untouched, drive on, because some places they don't want you to leave, and others they never let you. I tried for a while to pretend none of it happened, that I hallucinated the whole thing, stress, dehydration, maybe a fever, but then I started seeing them. Not the children. Not exactly. Not at first, just signs. A reflection in a store window that didn't match mine. Same build, same posture, but the face was blurred, like static over skin, or I'd hear it, low, airy whistling from the middle of nowhere. In cities. In crowds. Once I was walking back to my van, a different one, bought 6 months later, new plates, never taken back into the forests, and someone had left a small pile of ash and bones right in front of the sliding door, arranged in the same twisted spiral pattern from that forest clearing, exactly the same. I didn't sleep that night. I drove until morning. And then I drove some more. I kept thinking it might be guilt, that maybe something in me snapped out there. And what I was seeing now was some manifestation of fear or trauma. I was rationalizing the way I always used to. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a crack in me. It was something that followed, or something I let in. A year after it happened, I got an email. No subject line, no signature. Just a message that read, "You saw them too." It was sent from a disposable account, and when I tried to reply, the email bounced back, already deleted. But whoever it was knew what they were saying. They didn't need to explain. A week later, a package arrived in my P.O. box, no return address. Inside was a folded topographic map of Idaho. The center was circled in red ink, no label, just coordinates. And written in the corner, scrawled in tight, jagged handwriting, was a phrase that made my stomach turn. The roots go deeper than the trees. That night, I dreamed I was in the clearing again, only this time it wasn't abandoned. There were tents, campers, people, but they weren't moving. They were all standing, facing the fire pit, staring at it, waiting for something, and then I realized I was among them, but I couldn't move either. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering so fast I thought I might pass out. That was when I knew the truth. I hadn't escaped. I'd delayed it. I finally started digging, really digging. Old forest records, logging permits, local legends, anything I could get my hands on. Most of what I found was fragmented, half whispers, old maps that didn't line up with current ones, mentions of settlements that appeared on a census once and never again. But there was a pattern. Every few decades, someone would disappear in that area. Not dozens, just one or two, enough to be dismissed. Most were campers, solo travelers, people who wouldn't be missed for a while. And always, there were whispers afterward. Reports of strange lights, kids playing where no one lived, campfires seen deep in the trees, then gone by morning, and then silence. The kind that settles over a place like it's waiting for something. I drove back to Idaho in the fall. I don't know what I was looking for. Closure, maybe, answers, or maybe I just got tired of running. The map from the package had led me to a side road off Highway 95, past a boarded-up fire tower and through a rusted cattle gate with no ranch on the other side. The air smelled of pine and rot. I parked my van, not the old one, but still a Volkswagen like I couldn't fully let go, and hiked in on foot, GPS in hand. Nothing looked the same. I couldn't find the old path, the creek, or the clearing. But I felt it, like static under my skin. Like the air was holding its breath again. The coordinates led me to a glade. Empty, too empty. The grass was untouched, no insects, no bird song, just an eerie, sterile stillness. In the center, someone had erected a cairn, flat river stones stacked neatly, impossibly balanced. A small totem carved into the top one, a faceless child. I stood there a long time, waiting, listening. Nothing came, not then. That night I camped further down the ridge, out of sight from the glade. I built a small fire, sat by it, watched the flames dance, and that's when I heard it again. The whistling, faint, from behind me. I didn't turn around, I just said, "I know you're there." The sound stopped. A silence fell like a hammer, heavy, dense, Then I heard footsteps, small, deliberate, one at a time, approaching the edge of the firelight. I still didn't turn. Instead, I reached into my pack, pulled out the flare, the same kind, struck it. Red fire bloomed in my hand. I stood, turned slowly, and there they were. Not one child this time, but all of them. A line of small figures just beyond the edge of the trees, watching me, some with faces, some without, some flickering in and out of sight like the air around them didn't know how to hold their shape anymore. I held the flare high. "I know what you are," I said. "I know what this place is." A twitch, a movement, a smile on one of the faces, and then the wind spoke. Not a voice, but language all the same. It moved through the trees, through the fire, through me. A deep, ancient pressure behind my ears, a thought not my own, whispering, "You came back." My legs went weak, but I stood. "I came to end this," I said. "I came to understand it." Another wave of air pressed through me, not angry, curious, like the forest was tilting its head. Then stay. The words weren't a command. They were an invitation, a temptation. The fire behind me guttered. The figures stepped forward, and I understood then this wasn't about horror. Not really. It was about replacement, not possession, not death, but something deeper. Becoming. That forest had eaten so many, digested their voices, memories, bodies, until it could wear them like clothes. Just convincing enough. But it wanted more than mimicry. It wanted belief, obedience. It wanted me to kneel, to join. I raised the flare, held it out between us. The flame hissed in the air, and I said the only thing I could say. No. I threw the flare into the brush. The dry undergrowth caught instantly. Fire leapt up the trunks. The children screamed, not with voices, but with sound. Bones snapping, air tearing, 1,000 cicadas shrieking from the trees. I didn't wait. I ran. Again, through smoke and shadow, downhill, across rock and root, past the cairn, through the glade that had no footprints. I didn't stop running until I hit pavement. Didn't stop driving until the sun rose 2 states away. That was 6 months ago. Since then, nothing. No dreams, no emails, no signs, just silence. And in that silence, I've begun to understand the real danger. Not the children, not even the forest. It's the idea that something could exist out there, something ancient, patient, hungry, and all it has to do is wait, because curiosity will always come. In a Volkswagen with a full tank and a belief that nature is kind, it waits for someone like I was, eager, alone, searching for meaning on forgotten trails. So if you hear about an old campground in Idaho, one that isn't on the maps, one that locals wave off as abandoned, remember this. They're not lying. They just don't want to admit what they know. Some places are left off maps for a reason, because the people who live nearby, they want it that way. They know what happens when it's found, and they know how hard it is to forget. I tried to rebuild a life after that, a quieter one, away from the forests, away from the questions. No more RV camping, no more solo trips. I sold the van, got a studio apartment near Boise. Small, cramped, boring as hell, but safe. For a while, I convinced myself it was over, that what I'd done, the fire, the refusal, the run, had severed the connection, closed the door between me and whatever that place was. And for 6 full months it worked. No dreams, no whispers, no flickering shapes and reflections. I went back to an office job, bought a new phone, cut contact with the few people I'd told fragments of the story to, buried it, tried to live. But then last week I woke up to the smell of smoke. There was no fire in the building. Nothing cooking on the stove, just the faint scent, pine pitch and scorched moss drifting in from the hallway. I opened the door, and there it was, a pile of rocks, stacked carefully, deliberately, right outside my apartment. No note, just the same spiral scratched into the top stone. I didn't sleep that night, and for the first time in over half a year, I started hearing the whistling again. Not outside, inside, coming from the vents, the drains, the crack beneath the front door. It would rise for 30 seconds, then silence, then return. Always the same notes, always just before sleep. I tried to block it out. Headphones, white noise, pills, nothing worked. And worse, my reflection had begun to drift again. Not constantly, but enough. I'd brush my teeth and see it smiling at me, even when I wasn't. I'd glance at the window at night and see a second silhouette behind mine. Small, still. I knew then what I didn't want to admit. I never escaped that place. Not fully. Whatever lives out there doesn't need to drag you back physically. It only needs a seed, an opening. It needs to be remembered, and I'd given it that. Every night since that forest, every time I closed my eyes and tried not to think about it. That's how it survives. Memory is its soil. 3 days ago, I made a decision. I packed a bag, just one. Notebooks, photos, maps, recordings, everything I'd collected, and I left. Didn't tell anyone where I was going. Just started driving, not in an RV this time. Just a beat-up Subaru, borrowed from a friend. I didn't take the highways. I stayed on back roads, county roads, dirt paths. I kept the music low, the windows cracked, waiting to hear it again. The wind, the voices, the invitation. And finally, just before dusk tonight, I reached the old turnoff. The gate was still there, rusty, hung open like it was expecting me. The forest hadn't changed, still dense, still unnaturally quiet. But now it felt alert, like it remembered me too. I walked in slow, careful. The glade was gone, burned, charred down to soil and bone, but the cairn had returned, built fresh, same stones, same spiral, and now something new. A small folded note tucked into the base. I picked it up with shaking hands. On it was one sentence, scrawled in black ink that looked wet, even though it wasn't. You're almost ready. Ready for what? That's the question that's been burning behind my eyes since I lit that flare and ran from the children that weren't children. And now I think I understand. It's not about death or madness. It's about surrender. That place, whatever ancient consciousness anchors it, it doesn't kill you. It changes you, wears you. It waits until you're hollow enough from fear and memory and isolation, and then it fills you up with something else, something older. That's how it stays alive, by becoming stories, by living in us. So why did I come back? Why am I here now, under this sickly red sky, sitting at the edge of a place that wants to become me? Because I refuse to vanish quietly. If this thing survives through forgetting, through silence, through people vanishing without anyone ever knowing, then I'll do the opposite. I'll leave my story behind, all of it. Let it be read, heard, spread. Let the light of it push back the dark. Because once you know, once you understand what I saw in those woods, you become another closed door, a memory that won't cooperate, a signal flare in the dark, warning others. That's why I'm telling you this now. That's why I've shared every terrifying detail, so you won't go looking, so you'll stay away. But if you ever find yourself near central Idaho, if someone tells you about an old forest campground that isn't on the map, if you see children playing where no one should be, if you hear whistling at dusk when the air goes still, you'll know what to do. You won't ask questions. You won't follow the sounds. You won't go into the trees. Because even if you leave, even if you think you made it out, you won't be the same. Not ever again. And that thing in the forest, it'll still be waiting, patient, hungry, smiling behind eyes that look like yours. You don't come to the Black Hills of South Dakota expecting silence to sound like a threat. That's what I remember most from that first night. How the air seemed to press against your eardrums when the world went quiet, like something was holding its breath just beyond the tree line, waiting. We always romanticize these places, rugged American landscapes, the open road, freedom in the form of pine needles and winding asphalt. But I learned something out there. The land doesn't care about your freedom. And silence. Silence can be the first sign that you're being watched. My name's Adam. I was 34 the summer I went missing for 3 days. I was driving a 97 Volkswagen Eurovan. I'd restored myself. She wasn't fast, but she was faithful, had taken me across the Rockies through Joshua Tree all the way up to Olympic. I'd spent years solo camping across America, always seeking something I couldn't name. Solitude, maybe. Peace. Some version of myself I could respect. I never found it in cities, only in the woods with dirt under my boots and the smell of pine hanging in the air like incense. That summer, I wanted somewhere I hadn't been before. somewhere with weight, history. People talk about the Black Hills like they're magic. Sacred ground, haunted land, ancient bones under the trees. And I thought, perfect. I wanted something to feel real. I got that, just not the way I expected. I entered South Dakota from the west, stopping first in Deadwood, quaint, theatrical. It was late July, hot during the day, cool at night, the kind of heat that feels like it's holding in a storm. I stocked up, cans, water, fuel, a topo map from an old hiker's shop that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. The clerk was this wiry man, grizzled, maybe 70, who looked like he lived half in this world and half in another. He saw my van and asked where I planned to camp. I told him I was heading into the hills, maybe near Pactola Lake, maybe somewhere more remote. He paused, hand hovering over the register. "You solo?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me for a little too long. Then he slid the map across the counter and tapped a shaded area southwest of the lake. "Don't go here," he said. "People vanish in that stretch. No trails. Locals won't even hunt near it." I half smiled, thinking he was playing it up. "You mean the ghost stories?" He didn't laugh. "I mean, you won't come back the same, if you come back at all." He charged me and said nothing else. I should have listened. I slept in the van that night on the edge of town. The next morning, I made my way deeper into the hills, past Pactola, past the tourist overlooks, into the roads that weren't even roads anymore. There were no trail markers where I went, just barely legible logging routes and the occasional rusted sign warning about old mines or fire danger. Around noon, I found a clearing. Slight slope, soft grass, tree cover dense enough to feel private. No one in sight for miles. It was perfect. That's what I wrote in my journal. Perfect. I set up the awning, cracked a warm beer, and listened to the wind press through the pines like a tide. That's when I first noticed the quiet. No birds, no bugs, just wind, and even that sounded off, like it wasn't moving the trees so much as whispering between them. I chalked it up to elevation and fatigue. I've been alone long enough in the woods to know your mind starts shaping silence into stories if you let it. I took a short hike that afternoon, about 2 miles up the ridge, just to get the lay of the land. I noticed weird things. A pile of stones arranged in a perfect circle. Not a fire ring, no soot, no ash. Just stones, smooth, pale gray, like river rock, stacked with intention. I saw it again a half-mile later. Another one, slightly larger. Again, no obvious purpose. No campsite nearby. I made a note of it, thinking maybe it was a local tradition or trail marker I didn't know about. By the time I got back to the van, the sun was slipping behind the ridge. The temperature dropped fast. I cooked over my portable stove, ate in silence, and tried not to think about how unnerved I felt. That's not normal for me. I like being alone. I like the dark. But that night I didn't light a fire. I told myself it was to preserve that battery, but the truth is I didn't want to attract attention from what I didn't know. Then the knocking started. It was just past 11. I was lying in the van, reading by lantern, when I heard 3 knocks. Solid, sharp, against the van's side panel. Knock, knock, knock. I froze, didn't move, didn't breathe. I waited, staring at the thin aluminum wall like I could see through it. I thought maybe it was a branch, but the van wasn't under a tree, and it didn't sound like something falling. It sounded deliberate. I reached for the knife I kept wedged in the sliding door's side pocket. Another knock. 3 again. Slower this time. Knock, knock, knock. I yanked the curtain back and looked out. Nothing. Just trees. Stillness. No movement. I opened the door, knife in hand, heart hammering. I stepped out barefoot onto the cold grass. I walked the perimeter with my flashlight. No tracks, no animals, no people. But then I turned back toward the van and froze. The stones. Another circle. Right next to the passenger door. 6 or 7 of those smooth gray rocks arranged exactly like the ones I saw earlier. Except they hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in the driver's seat, engine idling, headlights cutting through the trees like they might hold something back. The knocking didn't come again, but the sense of being watched never left. By morning, I convinced myself it had to be a prank. Some locals screwing with out-of-staters. I've heard of that. People bored in small towns messing with campers. That had to be it. The rock circles were just meant to scare me, and it was working. I packed up fast. I should have left, but I didn't, because I'm stubborn, because I didn't want to believe I was scared off by shadows and rocks. I told myself I'd stay one more night, just one. Then I'd move on. It's always the second night that changes you. That's what the locals say I would learn later. If the forest wants you, it doesn't take you right away. It waits. It learns you first. That night, it stopped learning. That night, it started calling me in. I spent the day pretending things were normal. That's the only way I can put it. I made coffee like usual, sat in the camp chair under the awning, read a dog-eared Steinbeck novel I'd brought. I even went on another hike, shorter this time, about a mile loop around the van's clearing. But the whole time, I felt it again. The pressure. That low, unnatural hush that doesn't belong in any living forest. You know what a normal forest sounds like? Alive, buzzing, creaks, warbles, distant chirps, life. Even in silence, there's usually something humming. But that day, it felt like the woods were holding their breath again, like something deep beneath the surface was stirring and everything else had fled. I noticed more circles of stones, 3 this time, all different sizes, each more elaborate than the last. One had a small stack of bones in the middle, tiny ones, bleached clean, maybe rabbit or squirrel, arranged like an offering or a warning. I remember squatting down beside it, staring at those tiny bones and saying out loud, "Okay, what the hell is this?" Just to break the silence, just to hear my own voice, grounded and human. It didn't help. I got back to the van by late afternoon and decided to keep the engine off for the night. No more hiding behind headlights or the purr of ignition. If something wanted to knock again, I'd be ready. Or I thought I would. I ate a cold can of chili, didn't light the stove, didn't want the smell traveling. I locked the doors, even though I'd never needed to in any forest before. I sat in the driver's seat with my headlamp off, listening. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint at first, like rotting bark. Wet leaves left too long in a bucket. I thought maybe a critter died nearby, but the smell grew sharper, more acidic, like meat gone sour in the sun, mixed with something metallic, something coppery, like blood. I turned the headlamp on and checked the vents. Nothing. I stepped outside, scanned under the van, around the trees. Nothing. But the smell was stronger out there, thick and sticky in my nose, like it had a weight to it. It made my teeth hurt. And then the whispering started. I swear to God, it was a whisper. Low, crawling along the tree line. Not English, not any language I knew. Just murmurs, syllables dragged through gravel. I stood perfectly still, every hair on my arm standing up, knife clenched so tight my knuckles ached. I backed up toward the van slowly, not turning my back to the woods. I climbed in, locked the door, drew the curtain, and sat in the dark. I wanted to believe it was the wind, but I've camped in 60-mile-an-hour gusts on cliff edges. I know what wind sounds like. This was something else. Intentional, like it was circling, like it knew where I was. And then the whispering stopped. Silence fell again, thick and immediate, like a door had closed somewhere. I thought it was over, but I was wrong. It was only changing tactics. Because around midnight, the van started shaking. Not violently, subtly. Like something was walking around it in slow, deliberate steps, not touching it, not knocking, just circling. I felt each footstep through the tires, a dull thud, almost imperceptible but rhythmically exact. I couldn't move, I didn't breathe. And then, I swear on everything, I heard a voice. It sounded like my brother, Adam, clear as day, muffled slightly like it was coming from under the van. "Come out, man, it's okay." My brother Josh had died 3 years ago, motorcycle crash in Arizona. I hadn't heard his voice since the funeral playback of his old voicemails, but there it was, right outside my van, calm, familiar, reassuring. That's when I knew this wasn't something human, because grief makes you weak. It makes you believe things that shouldn't be possible. I almost opened the door. Almost. I slid forward in the driver's seat and touched the handle. And then I remembered something. The voice was wrong. Not in tone, not in cadence, in word choice. Josh never said man like that. It wasn't his rhythm. It was someone pretending to be him, or something. I jerked my hand back and started the van. The voice stopped. The footsteps stopped. I turned on every light I had, put the high beams on, and just sat there, hands shaking, the engine vibrating beneath me like a lifeline. I stayed that way until dawn, white-knuckled, watching the woods. At sunrise, I stepped out. The stone circle was back. This time, it wasn't rocks, it was teeth. Dozens of them. Animal, human. I couldn't tell, all arranged in a perfect ring just outside the van's sliding door. I lost it then. Grabbed my gear, didn't even pack properly. I drove the van through the clearing, over roots and brush, until I found the road again. But the road wasn't there. I had the map. I had the GPS. But the road was gone. I was driving in circles. I passed the same fallen pine 3 times. The same boulder with a split down the middle like a scar. The forest had changed around me, and I was stuck inside it. I'd read about this before, how people in the Black Hills get turned around disoriented, end up walking in loops even with compasses. Some call it magnetic anomalies. Others say it's just human error. But this wasn't error. This was deliberate. I stopped the van, turned off the engine, and that's when I saw the figure, about 30 yards into the trees. Too far to see clearly, but close enough to feel its shape pressing on me. It was tall, gaunt, motionless, and it was wearing my brother's jacket, the same one we buried him in. I couldn't breathe. I closed my eyes, counted to 5, and looked again. It was gone. But in its place, another stone circle. This one had my journal in the middle, pages torn as if read and discarded. I picked it up. One word had been carved into the cover in something that looked like blood. Stay. I didn't. I drove until the van nearly tipped, trying to force it down a drainage wash. I got lucky. Found an old fire access road. It led me back to the highway after 3 hours of crawling, scraping the undercarriage, my nerves frayed to the bone. When I hit asphalt again, I cried. Not because I was out, but because part of me wanted to go back. That forest, it gets inside you, and it doesn't let go. Back on the highway, I drove without a destination, just west, away. That was enough. My hands gripped the wheel so tight I didn't realize until my fingers went numb. I didn't stop for food. Didn't stop for fuel until the tank warned me it was almost dry. Even then, I pulled into a small station outside Rapid City like a fugitive, scanning every tree line, every reflective surface, half expecting to see my brother's jacket or that circle of teeth waiting on the pavement. The guy at the counter was in his 60s, maybe older, wearing a faded denim vest and a Vietnam vet patch. I must have looked half crazed. Mud on my boots, shirt stained with sweat and pine sap, eyes wild. He gave me a cautious once-over, but didn't ask questions. As I was paying for gas and a couple of protein bars, I blurted out, "Have you ever heard weird stories about the Black Hills? People getting lost, weird things?" His face didn't change, but his eyes flicked just for a second toward the window behind me, toward the forest line far in the distance. Then he said, "Too many." He didn't elaborate. I didn't press. I slept that night in a well-lit Walmart parking lot with the doors locked, pepper spray in my lap, and a heavy wrench beside my bedroll. No sounds, no whispers. But sleep didn't come easy. And when it did, it brought dreams I don't even want to describe. Things that spoke in voices I knew, faces that shifted like wet clay, trees that bled. When I woke up, the van was ice cold. And my brother's jacket, his real jacket, the one I'd kept sealed in a box in the back, was hanging neatly on the passenger seat, still folded, still reeking faintly of pine. That was the moment I knew the forest hadn't let me go. Not really. You don't walk away from that kind of place clean. You leave, sure, but it follows. Not with footsteps, not with ghosts, with memory, with suggestion. It gets into your head like smoke, like mold. And if you let it fester, it spreads. I tried to forget. Really, I did. I took a break from traveling, rented a small place in Nebraska far from the trees, got a job at a bike shop, something simple, physical. I thought that would ground me, but every night I'd dream of circles, not always made of stone or teeth, sometimes pine cones, sometimes sticks. One time in a feverish daze, I found myself stacking pennies in a perfect ring on my kitchen floor. No memory of starting, just standing over them, sweating, as if something had been watching through me. That's when I went back to the research. Real, deep research. Not just blog posts or Reddit threads. I dug through newspaper archives, ranger logs, coroner's reports. I looked for anyone else who might have seen what I saw, or something like it. And sure enough, the stories were there. Not many, and never taken seriously. A family went missing in 1997. Volkswagen camper found abandoned on a Forest Service road near Pactola Reservoir. No signs of struggle, no bodies ever found. Just 3 sets of footprints circling the van in an ever-shrinking spiral before vanishing. A solo hiker in 2011 was rescued after being lost for 9 days. When interviewed, he claimed the forest turned against him. Trees moving, voices calling. He was deemed delusional and placed under psychiatric care. And then there was the old legend, one that dated back to the Lakota tribes. They called it Sika Hollow, evil place. A patch of forest said to trap spirits and whisper madness into the ears of travelers. Even the tribal elders refused to enter after dark. They said the land there remembers pain, and that it protects something, or maybe hides it. So here's the part that still messes me up. The real reason I'm telling this story: 2 weeks ago, a young couple from Colorado disappeared in that same area I camped. VW Eurovan, mint green, just like mine. They posted pictures on social media. Big smiles, peace signs. First night off-grid in the Black Hills. Then nothing. Search teams found the van, doors wide open, food untouched. No sign of struggle. But the local sheriff's office included one strange detail in their initial report before scrubbing it later. They'd found a circle near the van, made of teeth, almost identical to the one I saw. I wanted to ignore it, write it off, say it was coincidence or folklore seeping into bad journalism. But then 3 days ago, I got a package, no return address, just my name, handwritten. Inside was a small, dirt-smeared notebook and a tooth, a human molar. I haven't opened the notebook yet. I can't bring myself to, not yet, because I know what I'll find. Circles, whispers, names of the missing, and maybe, worst of all, my own. I thought I escaped. But some places, they don't just haunt you, they claim you. And I think the Black Hills are still waiting for me to come back, or for someone else to take my place. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever thought about camping there, chasing solitude in the woods, thinking the darkness is just part of the experience, remember this: nature isn't always kind, and some forests aren't just wild, they're hungry. I didn't sleep the night the package arrived. I just sat in the driver's seat of the van in my garage, doors locked, notebook unopened in my lap, staring at the tooth resting in a Ziploc bag on the dashboard. It wasn't brown or aged. It was clean, fresh, like it had only just been pulled. The lights in the garage flickered once around 3 a.m. Not enough to scare me, but enough to remind me I wasn't alone. It wasn't until the next morning, after I'd watched the sun rise through the grimy window of the garage door, that I opened the notebook. The handwriting was jagged, inconsistent, as if the writer's hands were shaking, or like they weren't entirely in control. At first, it was a journal, a normal one. Their names were Carrie and Max, a couple in their early 30s from Boulder. They were teachers, both of them. Biology and photography. They'd bought the van during the pandemic, fixed it up, and made a pact to camp in all 50 states. South Dakota was their 27th. They mentioned the Black Hills as quiet, surprisingly peaceful, even underrated. There were Polaroids taped in between the pages. Smiles, sun-dappled forest paths, s'mores by a smokeless fire. I almost believed maybe this time the forest had let someone in without asking for a price. But by the 4th day, the handwriting changed. No more Polaroids. Carrie wrote about hearing people whispering outside the van. Low, wet voices. Not like they're saying words, just syllables being stretched. Like someone trying to remember how to talk. Max said he found a bird nailed to a tree. Still alive. Its wings had been sewn shut with some kind of twine. Beneath it, a spiral of flattened mushrooms had formed a pattern she couldn't describe. She drew it anyway. I recognized it instantly. The same spiral I saw in the rocks. The same one my brother had been walking toward. Carrie described the same feelings I had. A pulling in the gut, like an emotional undertow. A grief that didn't belong to her. Memories she couldn't place. Visions of old fires. Broken spears. Screaming without mouths. She tried to rationalize it. Max didn't. His entries grew less coherent. He began drawing instead of writing, trees bending over, people with no eyes, vanishing footprints. He drew a page full of teeth, then one full of circles, then just black scribbles. Carrie's last entry wasn't a sentence, it was a question. If we never existed, will anyone know we were here? That was it. The rest of the pages were blank, save for one, the second to last page. On it, written in all caps, in a hand I recognized because I swear it was my own, were the words, "You were supposed to stay." I dropped the notebook, drove, didn't know where I was going. Just knew I had to leave the house, the garage, the smell of pine that had suddenly returned to my clothes even though I hadn't been in a forest for weeks. I ended up in a diner 30 miles out, halfway to Badlands National Park. I sat there for 2 hours, nursing burnt coffee and staring at the laminated menu, trying to convince myself I wasn't losing it. A woman in the booth behind me was talking to her husband about some local hikers who'd gone missing last fall. Said they'd been found days later, alive, but in a state of confusion. Wearing each other's clothes, one was found sleeping beneath a fallen log with no memory of how he got there. The other had pulled all her teeth out, every single one, smiling the whole time. I nearly dropped my mug. She noticed me listening, gave me a polite smile, then turned back to her husband. I asked the waitress where the nearest ranger station was. She looked at me like I'd asked where the closest spaceship landed. "There's one near Sylvan Lake," she said, "but if you're planning to camp out there..." She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. I knew what she was thinking. I knew what I was thinking. I was going back, not because I wanted to, because I had to. You don't bring something back from a place like that without consequence. You don't leave someone behind and expect the woods to forget. You don't just wake up from a nightmare and call yourself healed when the dirt's still under your fingernails. The Black Hills weren't finished with me. I wasn't even sure if I had ever left. So I drove. Back to the beginning. Back to the place where the pines leaned just a little too far inward, where the sun never quite warmed the ground, where echoes carried too long and the trails never matched the maps. It felt like returning to a crime scene. Like something had been waiting, knowing that I would eventually come back. The last thing I remember before turning onto the Forest Service road was a crow sitting on the wooden sign that welcomed hikers. Not perched. Balanced. Unmoving. Like a sentry. Its eyes were black pits. Its wings looked wet. And when I passed under it, it didn't caw or fly. It just turned its head to follow me. Like it knew me. Like it remembered. The deeper I drove, the quieter it got. Even the wind gave up trying to move through that place. And then, after a long bend in the dirt road, I saw it. My old campsite. The fire ring was still there. The stones were still arranged. And in the middle of it all, folded neatly and possibly preserved, was the t-shirt my brother wore the day he died. It was clean, no blood, no tears, no dirt, just waiting like everything else. That's when I heard it again. The breathing. Behind me. Too close, too deep. Not animal, not human. Just there. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to, because I knew what I'd see if I did. And I knew what it wanted, what it had always wanted. Not me. Remembrance. Witness. Because some places don't trap you to kill you. They trap you to carry their memory forward, to let the horror pass from roots into words, to make sure no one forgets. And now you know. So be careful where you camp. Be careful what you listen to in the wind. And if you ever find yourself in the Black Hills and the forest feels too quiet, like it's holding its breath, it's not the wildlife. It's them. Waiting for your silence. Waiting for your story. So they can finally let mine go. I didn't bring a tent this time. Didn't bring food or a camera or my notebook. All I brought was the shirt, my brother's shirt, and my voice. Because if this place demanded memory, if that's the price it extracts from the ones who make it back, then I would pay it in full. I stepped out of the van barefoot, the pine needles sharp but familiar beneath my feet. The trees seemed to inhale when I did. The air was thick, not just with moisture, but with meaning. The kind of weight you feel at the edge of a funeral or the bottom of a secret. I walked to the center of the ring, shirt clutched tight in my hands, and whispered his name into the wind. Ben, not loud, just enough that it was real, that he would know I remembered. The forest responded, not in sound but in sensation. A pressure on the skin like stepping into warm water, a flicker in the branches though nothing moved. Then, from behind me, a single voice. Not a growl, not a whisper, but a name. Max. I turned around, and I saw him. Not Ben. Max. From the notebook, standing at the edge of the clearing, barefoot and pale, hands stained with earth, lips cracked and trembling. His eyes were black, not because they lacked light, but because they had seen too much of it. Not madness, not feral, just open. Behind him, others stood. Carrie, the woman with the missing teeth, the boy from the photo by the spiral rocks, and more. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all standing, all silent, all watching. Their presence didn't bring panic, just a heavy, grief-laced calm. They weren't here to hurt me, they were here to remember. And for the first time since I left this forest, I realized something so simple, so brutally human, I nearly collapsed. These woods didn't take people. They held them in the only way they knew how. Because no one else did, because the world forgets too easily, because grief demands roots, and this place had more than enough. I stepped forward and laid the shirt on the ground, and in that moment the temperature changed. A breeze rolled in, not from above, but from below. The ground itself exhaled. My skin prickled, not with fear, but with recognition. A kind of psychic handshake. Something behind me cracked, soft and splintering. I turned, expecting the trees to shift, but it was the van, every window fogged from the inside, except for one handprint, pressed gently on the rear window, fingers long, familiar. I walked toward it slowly, opened the door. Inside, the interior lights blinked once and then stayed on. And there on the dashboard, next to the tooth I had left behind, was a Polaroid. Fresh, still developing. I picked it up with shaking fingers. It was a photo of me, standing in the circle, surrounded by the lost, all of them smiling, peaceful, still. And there next to me, one hand on my shoulder, was my brother, Ben, looking older, wiser. But there, I don't remember crying. I just remember sitting there in the van with that photo in my hand for what felt like hours, watching the fog slowly recede from the windshield. And I knew then I had been allowed to leave again, but only because I'd given the forest what it wanted, witness. I drove out of the Black Hills that night in silence, no music, no headlights for the first mile even, just the gravel under my tires and the strange, living hush that followed me until I hit pavement. I've never gone back, but I carry the forest with me, in my breath, in my bones, in every campsite where the wind dies too fast or the silence creeps in like a tide. And if you're hearing this, maybe you've felt it too. That pull, that quiet, that moment where the woods seem to pause, just long enough to listen. That's when you know it's near, the place that watches, the place that waits. So if you ever go camping in a Volkswagen, free and light and untethered, don't forget this. Some places don't want you to leave. Others need you to stay. But the worst, they don't care either way. They just need you to remember, because the missing aren't lost. They're held, and they are waiting for you to speak their names so they can finally rest, so they can finally let go, so they don't become part of the whisper, and you don't become the next one gone. Sleep light out there, friends, and don't forget to leave the fire burning just a little longer. I never used to believe in the supernatural, not really. I figured the stories people told around campfires were just that, stories. Heat-induced hallucinations, sleep deprivation, overactive imaginations. I used to laugh when people brought out their ghost tales the second the sun dipped below the tree line. But then I saw something I still can't explain, and it changed the way I look at RV camping forever. It started in late October in Arizona near the Mogollon Rim. My wife, Erin, and I had been on the road in our Volkswagen Westphalia for nearly a year, doing the full-time RV life. Erin had just turned 34, and I was a few weeks shy of 36. We were both teachers on sabbatical, searching for something deeper than classrooms and standardized tests. That week, we were in the Tonto National Forest, chasing cooler weather and clearer skies. We pulled into a semi-remote campground just before dusk. It wasn't completely deserted, but it might as well have been. Maybe 4 other rigs in the entire area, all spaced out like chess pieces trying not to make eye contact. We parked beneath a cluster of ponderosa pines. The air smelled like sap and old firewood, with just a hint of distant smoke. It was the kind of place that should feel peaceful. But something felt off the moment we cut the engine. I should have trusted that first gut instinct, the heavy silence, the sudden stillness in the trees. Even the birds seemed unsure, chirping sporadically like they were waiting for permission to speak. We spent that first night doing what we always did, cooking outside, sipping wine, playing a round of cards on the camp table under the soft glow of our lantern. But as the sun dropped below the rim, a strange hum settled over the forest. Not loud, not mechanical, just present, like something too large to hear clearly but too near to ignore. I mentioned it to Erin. She paused, listening. "Crickets, maybe," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Later that night, I woke around 3 a.m. with the overwhelming sensation that something was watching me, the kind of feeling that clamps around your lungs before your brain catches up. I rolled over slowly. Erin was fast asleep, curled up against the van wall, her breath steady. I held mine. Then I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Not on the side of the van, not from the door, from the rear hatch. Deliberate, methodical, like someone trying not to wake us, but still needing us to know they were there. I stayed frozen, every muscle in my body tense. I stared at the closed blinds. No flashlight beams, no footsteps crunching gravel, just those 3 knocks echoing in my ears like they were etched into my bones. And then, silence. The next morning, I said nothing. I didn't want to alarm Erin, but as I poured our coffee, I noticed small marks on the dirt near the back of the van. Not footprints, exactly. More like wide impressions, smooth-edged, like someone had placed 2 bowls upside down in the dust and dragged them back a couple inches. I brushed it off, told myself it could have been animals. The forest plays tricks on the mind. We planned to stay 3 nights. That evening, we met a man named Joe, camped about a quarter-mile away in a beat-up Class C. He looked like he'd seen better years, wore old cargo pants, smelled faintly of diesel and sweat, and walked with a slight limp. Said he'd been coming to this campground for over a decade. "You seen anything weird out here?" I asked him, mostly joking. Joe paused, scratched the back of his neck, then gave us this look, half warning, half fatigue. "I don't stay past the 3rd night," he said, "ever." "I don't stay past the 3rd night," he said, "ever." I chuckled nervously, trying to gauge whether he was joking. "Why's that?" Erin asked, squinting against the setting sun. Joe didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the tree line like he was remembering something he'd tried to forget. "There's something in these woods that don't like people hanging around too long," he finally muttered. "I don't know what it is. I don't want to know. But it watches and it waits." He wasn't being dramatic. There was no showmanship in his tone, just the worn-down honesty of a man who'd seen something and learned to live with it. That night, the forest was louder. Not in volume, but in presence. Everything felt like it had shifted a few degrees to the left. The breeze no longer whispered, it scratched. The pines didn't sway, they leaned. The silence between sounds grew longer, more expectant, like the woods were holding their breath. Erin turned in early. I stayed up, sitting at the little folding table, listening. And that's when I saw it. Not clearly, just movement between the trees. A dark shape, low to the ground but fast, too fast to be a deer, too smooth to be a coyote. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on, and swept the beam in the direction of the motion. Nothing, just trees, and the strange illusion that some of them were facing me. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was scared, at least not consciously, but something in my brain wouldn't let go of what Joe had said. That there was something here. Something watching. The third morning, Erin asked if we could leave early. She didn't have a reason. She just said, "I'm not sleeping well here. Dema, I keep dreaming that something's walking circles around the van." That stopped me cold, because I hadn't told her about the knocks, and she hadn't heard them. We agreed to stay one more night, our original plan, but we packed everything except the bare essentials, just in case. Dusk came early. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, fingers across the dirt like they were trying to reach something. We cooked a simple dinner, barely spoke. The air between us was thick with things we weren't saying. As darkness settled, I double-checked every window, every latch, locked the doors, closed the blinds. I even placed our hatchet near the bed, feeling ridiculous for doing it, but not ridiculous enough not to. Sometime after midnight, I woke again, this time not to knocks, to movement, inside. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My mind screamed, "Someone's in here." But when I sat up, Erin was sleeping. The door was still locked. I could feel the weight, though, an invisible pressure on my chest, not physical, not like being pinned, more like presence, like something that was never supposed to be inside was now here, and it knew I knew. Then came the sound. It didn't make sense. It was like the sound of a zipper, slow, deliberate. But it wasn't coming from inside the van. It was outside, right next to the canvas of our pop-top roof, like someone was unzipping the sky above us. I reached for the flashlight, turned it on, dead. The batteries were new. I'd replaced them before the trip. I turned to Erin. Her eyes were wide open. She whispered, "It's above us." I didn't move. She didn't either. And in that silence, we heard it exhale. A long, rattling breath, so close I could feel it vibrate the aluminum frame of the van. We lay frozen. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The air inside turned cold. Not forest cold. Like something had pulled the temperature out of the space around us and taken it with them. Eventually, dawn came. The breath disappeared. The presence lifted. And when we finally stepped outside, there were drag marks in the dirt again. Only this time, they circled the entire van. Twice. The circles around the van weren't neat. They cut into the dirt like something heavy had been dragged, but it wasn't just weight. There was intention. One loop was wide and inconsistent. The second was tighter, more precise, almost like it had stopped to watch us. Erin wouldn't speak. She stared at the marks, jaw clenched, arms folded tight across her chest like if she let go, she'd unravel. I didn't ask her what she'd heard or seen. I didn't need to. Whatever it was, it had looked through her the way it had breathed through us. Some things don't need to be put into words. We left before the sun was fully up. Didn't even make coffee. I fired up the Volkswagen, gravel spitting behind us as we bounced down the dirt road in silence. We didn't even talk until we were 20 miles out, somewhere near a gas station with a half-burnt roof and a vending machine older than we were. Erin finally said, "You heard it, didn't you?" I nodded. "I don't think it was trying to get in," she whispered. "I think it was already in, just not all the way." Her voice cracked on the last words. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was pale. Too pale. And her hands trembled as she sipped coffee like the caffeine had already hit her veins before the cup even touched her lips. We didn't go home. Not right away. We drove south. We didn't plan it. We just kept moving. Through small towns with peeling paint and rusted out signs. Through hills that folded over themselves like they were trying to hide something. I didn't want to stop. Erin didn't want to stop. But eventually, the van needed gas and we needed rest. We pulled into a dusty little RV park just outside of Flagstaff. It had maybe 4 other campers, all older rigs, no kids, just retirees who waved with polite suspicion. The place wasn't fancy, but it had hookups and shade, and most importantly, it wasn't that forest. That first night there, nothing happened. And for a moment, I let myself believe we were fine. I convinced myself that what we'd experienced was a fluke, a strange encounter, a one-off anomaly. But that second night, the dreams came. Mine started in the woods, back in that campground, except it wasn't dark. It was dusky, the light caught in perpetual twilight. I was walking in a circle, over and over, around the van, and every time I passed the front, I saw someone standing in the windshield, watching me. Only it wasn't me, it wasn't Aaron, it wasn't anyone. It was something made of shadow and angles, something that had borrowed the shape of a man but hadn't quite understood the details. The hands were too long, the mouth was wrong, too wide, not smiling. Just open. And every time I passed, it tilted its head further, just a few more degrees, until finally, on the seventh loop, it stepped out from the van and followed me. I woke up gasping. Sweat soaked through my shirt, and my heart was pounding like I'd been running for hours. Erin was sitting up too. She said, "Did it follow you?" I didn't answer, because I already knew she'd seen the same thing. Whatever it was, it hadn't stayed behind. It had followed us, not like a person, not like an animal. It wasn't limited by roadways or reason. It had tasted something inside us, and now it was moving hot through us. The next morning, we made a choice. We called my uncle Mike, who lived up in Idaho. He owned a small patch of land and an old hunting trailer, and I remembered visiting it as a kid, how quiet it had been, how far from everything. No cell service, no power lines, just thick trees, high cliffs, and a river that sounded like breathing when the wind hit it right. We told him we needed a place to rest for a while. He didn't ask questions, just gave us the code to the gate and told us the lock was probably rusted shut, so bring a crowbar. The drive was long. We barely talked. But the silence between us felt different now. Not scared, exactly. More like determined. We didn't know what we were driving toward, only what we were driving from. But deep down, I think we both hoped that if we could get far enough, deep enough into the nothing, that thing wouldn't follow, that maybe it couldn't. But what we didn't know then was this: it doesn't follow the van. It follows the wound. And we'd already let it in. The property in Idaho sat on the edge of nothing. It was framed by pines so thick you could lose your voice in it. The kind of silence that didn't just muffle sound, it swallowed thought. You could scream and the trees wouldn't even rustle. And at first, that's exactly what I wanted. We found the gate padlocked, just like Mike warned us. It took 2 swings with the crowbar before the rust gave and the chain clattered to the ground. It was dusk by the time we pulled in. The trailer was old but intact. No lights, no power, just the thin chimney pipe poking from the roof and 2 folding chairs tipped over in the dirt like ghosts had been playing cards and left in a hurry. I looked at Erin. She looked at me. We didn't speak. Just sat up next to the trailer and plugged into silence. For the first time in days, I slept. Not long, not well. But it was sleep without shapes, without dreams. And in the morning, the air felt clean. We spent the next 2 days doing nothing, drinking coffee from a camp stove, walking the perimeter, noticing how the animals here weren't afraid. A fox padded across our sight that second morning, stared at us with dark, intelligent eyes, and vanished into the brush. I started to feel something strange, not peace exactly, but distance. Like whatever had wrapped itself around our lungs back in that forest was still out there, but less. And then, on the 3rd night, Erin came back from a walk alone. Something in her eyes had changed. She didn't speak for hours, just sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, rocking slightly the way she did when we'd camped too close to cities and she got overwhelmed by noise. Finally, I sat next to her and waited. She whispered, "I heard you." My stomach sank. I didn't say anything. "You did." She looked at me. "But it wasn't your voice. It was the way you would say it, if you wanted to hurt me." I stared at her. She went on, "It called from the trees, in your voice. But it was wrong, not just the sound, the intent. It sounded like you if you'd stopped loving me 10 years ago and were still pretending." I felt cold. She touched my hand. I know it wasn't you, but it knew exactly how you sound when you're trying not to show you're mad. That little crack at the end of a word. That fake calm. It's been studying us. I didn't know what to say, because she was right. That wasn't something a stranger could imitate. You can't fake someone's worst hidden thoughts unless you've lived inside them. The wind rose, not strong, just enough to rattle the pine needles, and for a moment I swear I heard it whisper my name, not out loud. Not from outside, from behind my eyes. That night, I didn't sleep. Neither did Aaron. We lay still, the van too quiet around us, and I could feel something brushing the edge of our world. Not like a presence outside the windows. It was more like the silence itself had changed texture. Thicker, like oil, slick against the soul. At 3:08 a.m., the fox came back. Only this time it stood at the foot of the van, just standing, watching us through the windshield. And I swear, its mouth didn't open, but I heard a voice in my head that said, "You brought it here." Not, "It followed you." Not, "It's here." You brought it here. The lights flickered inside my skull, not in the van, in my mind, like a bulb trying to burn out, one nerve at a time. Aaron sat up slowly, didn't say a word. We just watched that fox as it stood motionless, unblinking. And then without turning, without twitching, it walked back into the woods like it had delivered a message and didn't care if we understood. The next morning, Aaron said something I'll never forget. We're not supposed to run. That's what it wants. Movement. Panic. It eats direction. I didn't get it at first, but the more I thought about what had happened, the loops, the echoing knocks, the circling marks, the voices using our faces, I realized something. It didn't just feed on fear. It fed on reaction. You run, it follows. You question, it answers. Wrong. You try to leave, it creates a copy of the road, a copy of yourself. Like it was playing with possibility, like it didn't want to kill us, it wanted to fracture us. We stayed 3 more days. Each night, the fox returned. Each time it stood a little closer, each time it didn't blink, and each time it left, I could feel something loosening inside me, not like freedom, like a tether being cut. Like it was waiting to see who we were without ourselves. On the 5th night, Erin shook me awake. Her face was pale, her mouth trembling. She said, "You were sleep-talking." "I don't talk in my sleep. You do now." Her voice cracked. "You said it's warmer without skin." I sat up fast. The van was cold, too cold. Frost on the inside of the windshield, even though it was early fall and hadn't dipped below freezing in days. And across the glass, where the frost had gathered thickest, 4 finger-shaped lines had been wiped clean from the inside. I didn't breathe. Couldn't. My eyes traced the lines in the frost again and again, hoping I was wrong, hoping they curved, that they were smudges from our own hands. Condensation. Anything but what they obviously were. 4 long streaks, like someone had dragged fingers slowly down the inside of the windshield, but we hadn't touched the glass. Not that night. Not ever. Not like that. Erin reached out and pressed her palm next to the streaks. Her hand didn't match the spacing. The marks were too far apart, unless they were from something larger. We didn't speak, just sat there in the cold, watching our breath fog up a new layer of frost. This time, we didn't wait for the fox. We packed up just after sunrise. No breakfast, no ritual. I didn't even finish my coffee. I left it steaming on the bumper and drove out without looking back. Whatever peace we thought we'd found here had twisted, like the silence itself had grown teeth. We drove for hours, back through Idaho, cutting south toward Utah, then west toward Nevada. No real destination, just up way. The farther we got, the more I realized something was off. The road signs were inconsistent. Not the names, the fonts. Like the highway numbers had been drawn by someone who didn't quite remember how they were supposed to look. Slight curves where it should have been straight. A missing serif. A backwards 3. I didn't tell Erin, I just kept my eyes forward. But I saw her staring at the dashboard clock, and I knew she was counting the same thing I was. The time was wrong. We'd been driving for 4 hours. The gas gauge barely moved. The sun stayed low, like it had gotten stuck just past dawn, and yet the temperature rose steadily. By midday, the AC couldn't keep up, and the van's metal frame felt like it was radiating heat from the inside. Finally, we pulled over at a rest stop near Ely. At least that's what the sign said. It looked like any other. Picnic tables under metal awnings, a cracked vending machine, a bathroom with a flickering light. No other vehicles. No trash. No wind. I stepped outside. The moment I did, I felt it again. That sensation I'd first felt in the Oregon woods, like I wasn't alone inside my own head. But this time, it wasn't pressure. It was static, like a radio between stations. It buzzed faintly at the edge of hearing. Not a sound, exactly. More like a direction of sound. A sensation of turning toward something not there. Erin stayed inside the van. She didn't need to say it, but I could feel her panic. The kind you can't express in words. She was holding her arms across her chest, eyes squeezed shut, lips moving in silence. I walked toward the bathroom. I don't know why. I think I needed to look at myself in the mirror, make sure I was still me. The building smelled like bleach and dust. The air was dry, almost crackling. When I pushed open the door, the fluorescent light above flickered twice, then stayed on. No sound, no dripping sink, no flies. Just silence. I stepped to the mirror and stopped breathing. It was me, but not. There was a delay, a fraction of a second, barely noticeable. My head moved, then the reflection followed. Too smooth, too deliberate, like it was waiting to see what I'd do, then mimicking it with confidence. I lifted my hand, the mirror lifted back. But again, just a beat too late. That's when I saw the corner of its mouth twitch. Not mine. Its. The thing wearing my face smiled, just barely, a curl at the edge of its lips like it was proud of me. Or mocking me, or both. And then its mouth moved, but I didn't speak. The mirror leaned forward, its lips formed 4 words, "You were always hollow." I stumbled back, hit the stall door, it banged open with a metal screech, and I turned and ran. Back to the van. Erin was already in the driver's seat. Pale, shaking. "Chez tu," she said. I nodded. We didn't talk, just drove. This time I didn't care where, just forward, just motion. Something alive, something real. But after 20 minutes, the road curved and we saw a sign. Ely Rest Stop, 1 mile. I slammed the brakes. We stared at each other in silence. That sign. We'd just come from there. I checked the map, turned on the GPS. Nothing changed. It showed a clean road, no loops, no tricks. But our gut told us different. We'd seen this before. The forest that swallowed time. Whatever this was, it had followed us. Or maybe it had never left. Maybe it was still us, still inside us, and it was peeling away the parts that tried to resist. Erin looked at me and whispered, "I think it doesn't care where we go. I think it's trying to make us choose." I asked her what she meant. She looked away. "It wants to see what we do when the world doesn't behave the way it's supposed to, when our rules fail. It wants to see what we'll sacrifice to feel in control." I couldn't argue, because the truth is, I'd felt that temptation. To hurt something, just to feel real again. To press a thumb into my arm until I bruised, to scream just to see if the world would echo back. I'd even imagined driving into the trees. Not to die, just to see if they were real. That's what this thing did. It made you doubt not just your senses, but your impulses. It made you want to break the rules just to feel grounded. We didn't turn around, didn't go back to the rest stop. But as the sun set again, too early this time, I looked in the mirror. And for a split second, my reflection didn't. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Erin passed out in the passenger seat, wrapped in her hoodie, but I stayed upright, eyes fixed on the windshield, watching the desert stretch into shapes that didn't quite hold. The road had long since disappeared. We'd pulled off into some wash of sand and brush. No signal, no service, no sound, only stillness and the memory of that mirror not following me. Sometime after midnight, I saw lights, faint, off to the west, just above a low ridge. At first, I thought it might be a town, finally civilization, but then they blinked, not in a pattern, not like streetlights or headlights. They danced, staggered, as if whatever made them was drifting or walking through the dark with no clear direction. I killed the engine and watched. My hand hovered over the keys. I wasn't sure if I wanted to start the van and drive toward them or in the opposite direction. Then Erin whispered, "They're coming." I jumped. I didn't realize she'd woken up. Her voice was calm, too calm. "What?" I asked. Her eyes didn't leave the lights. "They always come when you see the mirror. They're part of it. That's how it follows you." "What do you mean always? This has happened before?" She blinked slowly, like she'd just heard herself. I don't know why I said that. I reached out, put my hand on her shoulder, and she flinched. That's when I realized something else was wrong. Erin wasn't shivering, and it was cold. Bitter cold, despite the desert. My fingers were stiff on the steering wheel. My breath clouded in the air. But she sat there, sweat pooling at her neck, her skin almost steaming. She was burning up. I reached for the thermometer in the drawer, touched it to her temple. It blinked red. 105.6. I cursed, but she didn't react, just kept watching the lights. "We need to get you help," I said. "No," she whispered. "They'll just follow." I grabbed my coat, opened the driver's door, and stepped into the chill. The wind hit me like a wave, but even through it, I could still see the lights in the distance. They were closer now, lower, slower, like something crawling. And worse, I could hear them. Not sound, not really, but a rhythm. A pulsing in my bones, like a second heartbeat, out of sync, hungry. I slammed the door shut again and ran back inside. "We're going," I told her. "I don't care what they want." She didn't argue. She just looked at me with something sad in her face, like she knew I was too late. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, once, twice, then silence. I turned again. Nothing. Again, nothing. I slammed the wheel. "Come on, damn it." On the fourth try, it finally caught, but the lights on the dash glitched. The radio turned on by itself, static hissing loud, then quiet, then loud again. No station, no music, but a voice, low, warped, not speaking, just breathing. Erin clutched her head. "Make it stop," she whispered. "Please, don't let it in. Don't let it name me." The word hit me like ice. Name. She was right. This thing, whatever had been following us, it didn't act like a ghost or a creature. It didn't chase. It invited. It learned you, pulled pieces of you out, reflected them back. It made you recognize it, gave it form. And once you saw it, once you accepted it as real, once you gave it a name, you gave it power. And now it was learning Erin. I slammed the van into gear and floored it. The tires screamed over the dirt, skidding, slipping, thing. But the RV lurched forward. I kept my eyes straight ahead, didn't check the mirrors. I didn't want to see what was following. The lights, the reflections, the hollow pieces of ourselves. I drove until the sky turned gray and the horizon split open into heat and dust. We found a town, a real one this time. I know because there were people, cars, movement. Not frozen, not silent. The sun hung in the right place. The clock ticked normally. We parked behind a gas station and stayed there for hours. I bought Erin ice packs, aspirin, water. Her fever dropped. Slowly. She didn't say much, just watched the sun rise and set again like she wasn't sure what was real. And me? I watched every reflection I could find, the windows, the puddles, the metal, the door of the vending machine, just to make sure it was me looking back. It always was. But I stopped trusting that meant anything because I remembered what it said. You were always hollow. And if I was hollow, if Erin was too, then maybe that thing had been living in us from the start. I thought we were done with it, that after fleeing the desert, after driving until the gas tank bled dry and Erin's fever broke, we had somehow left it behind. But deep down, I knew better. You don't just escape something like that. Not when it knows your name. Not when it's already inside you. It was 3 days before we camped again. Not because we wanted to, but because we had no choice. I'd driven as far as I could, somewhere outside Flagstaff, high enough that the air turned thin, where pine trees stood tall like they were guarding something old. The campground was half empty. Quiet. Just a few scattered vans and tents, each separated by woods and dirt trails. It should have felt safe. But the stillness pressed on me like a held breath. We parked. We made dinner. We tried to act normal. And for a while, I let myself believe maybe it had all been some heat-driven hallucination. Maybe the mirror hadn't moved. Maybe Aaron's fever was just that, a fever. Maybe I'd imagined the voice. Then after the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, I stepped out of the van to toss our trash. That's when I saw it again. A single, shining panel of glass leaned against a tree. Not a mirror this time, a window, but freestanding, no frame, no cabin, no shack, just standing upright in the dirt like someone had sliced a piece of house out of thin air and left it there. It reflected the forest behind me, and the sky, and me. Only my reflection wasn't standing still. I froze, watched. My reflection slowly raised its hand and tapped the glass. Not once, not hard. And I felt it in my bones, like someone had rapped on my skull from inside. I stumbled backward, dropped the trash, ran back to the van. Erin saw my face and didn't ask questions. She just said, "It's found another way in." That night, we didn't sleep. The knocking came around 2 a.m., not on the van itself, but from the woods. Soft at first, like someone gently tapping bark with their knuckle. Closer. It circled the van, once, twice. Then silence. I reached for my phone. No signal. Again. It was always like that. No signal when it needed to be there most. I stared out the window into the trees. Nothing moved, not even the wind. And then a light. A soft glow, like moonlight filtered through water, but there was no water nearby. I stood. I didn't even realize I was moving. Something pulled me toward the door. "Don't," Erin said behind me, voice shaking. "That's how it gets you alone." "How do you know that?" I asked. But she just buried her face in her hands, because I saw my reflection call to me once, and I followed it. I turned. What happened? I lost time. Hours. Maybe more. I woke up in a different state, in a different van, alone, with someone else's name written on the inside of the windshield. My throat tightened. I'd seen that too. The words scratched into our glass back in the desert. But I hadn't told her. Not yet. I sat back down. Didn't speak again until morning. The next day, we decided to try something different. We drove into town, found a hardware store, and bought black plastic sheeting, covered every reflective surface inside the RV. The windows, the fridge, even the faucet. If this thing was using reflections to get to us, then we'd cut off every door it had. But by then, the damage was already done. I saw the first mark on my arm the next night. Not a cut, not a bruise, a print, like fingers pressed into my skin from the inside. It didn't hurt, but it looked impossible, like something inside me had tried to crawl out and changed its mind. Erin had them too, on her neck, her back. We didn't talk about it. Not anymore. It was like saying the words out loud gave it more shape, more space. So we stayed quiet, just drove and drove, through red rock, through pine, through rain and wind. Until one night, we found a cliffside pull-off above a narrow canyon. We parked, exhausted, done. Neither of us spoke for hours. Then, just after dark, Erin whispered, "It's not following us anymore." I didn't believe her. But she said it again. "It's not behind us now. It's in front." I stepped out of the van. Cold air hit me like a slap, and I knew she was right, because the moon reflected on nothing. The canyon below swallowed every bit of light, and just beyond the cliff's edge stood something tall, black, and rippling, like a shadow that had learned to stand. It wasn't a person. It was my shape. It looked like me. But its features were blurred, not undefined, erased, and in its chest was a pane of glass, smooth, shimmering. And in that pane, I saw something that made my knees go weak. I saw myself, but not as I was. I saw myself as I could have been, happy, whole, unafraid, living a life that hadn't been eaten by fear and silence and things in the dark. It was beautiful, terrible, and it raised a hand to the glass, waited, like it wanted me to touch it, to accept it. To let go of everything I was and step through. I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to. I stepped forward, only once. The wind kicked up, sharp and metallic, like it was warning me or inviting me. I couldn't tell. Behind me, the RV creaked. Inside, Erin whispered something I couldn't hear. But my eyes were locked on the thing ahead, the shape of me, the erased version. The version that had no past, no pain, no history, only possibility. And I saw it clearly now. That wasn't a mirror in its chest. It was a door, and it had been trying to open, through the glass in the desert, through the reflection in the gas station, through the whispers on Erin's lips when she slept. It had always been the same thing. This wasn't just some strange haunting. This was an invitation. And the price of walking through that door, I had to forget who I was. All of it. The mistakes, the grief, the hours spent waiting in silent forests, praying for something not to come, everything that made me real. I took another step. The thing tilted its head. It looked almost curious. Not predatory, not evil, just observing. Like it didn't care if I crossed over. It was just holding space in case I did. I reached out. My fingers nearly grazed the surface of that glass chest, and I heard it. My own voice, but not from me, from inside the pain. It was telling me to let go, to breathe, to stop running. Then I heard something else, from behind me. Erin, sobbing, saying one word over and over, "Stay." I turned, and I saw her standing barefoot outside the RV, in the dirt and gravel, hugging her arms to her chest, tears streaking her face, eyes locked not on the figure in front of me, but on me. And I knew what she saw. She saw me starting to disappear, to become part of that reflection, to lose the shape of who I really was. I stepped back. The figure didn't follow. It didn't react at all. It just stood there. Then it raised its hand, touched its chest, and pressed the glass shut like a door closing. Gone. The night fell quiet again. I walked back toward the van, past Erin, and we stood together in the dark, breathing, alive, still us. Weeks passed after that. The reflections didn't return. The mirrors stayed silent. We traveled slower, stayed in towns more often than forests, slept with the lights on. But the weirdest part? We missed it. Not the fear, not the danger, but the feeling that something beyond the normal had brushed up against us and asked, "Are you sure you want this life?" That question never left, and it wasn't a threat. It was a challenge. Because camping out here, in this great, endless, haunted country, you're going to meet yourself, eventually. Not just the parts you like, all of it. The shadows, the things you buried, the roads you didn't take. They'll find you in the silence between forest sounds, in the mirrors above your sink, in the stillness of a canyon at 3 a.m., and sometimes they'll come wearing your face. But here's the thing I learned. You don't beat the darkness by avoiding it. You face it, you drive through it, and you remember who you are every single mile, even when it tries to rewrite you, even when it offers something easier. You stay human, stay grounded, and above all, you stay present, because that's what the road demands. And that's what the thing in the mirror couldn't understand. We're not meant to be perfect. We're meant to be real. And out here, beneath the stars, between the campgrounds, surrounded by the beautiful, terrifying unknown, real is enough. So the next time you see something strange on the road, a glint in the trees, a figure that doesn't cast a shadow, a knock that comes with no source, don't run. Don't surrender. Just remember, you've been warned. And you're still here because you chose to be. And maybe that's the only protection we ever really have. I waited until dusk before stepping out of the RV again. It felt like a test. Standing on that patch of cracked earth at Flat Rock, watching the shadows lean longer from the tree line. The forest didn't feel quite alive, but it didn't feel empty either. It was like being watched from behind a two-way mirror. I made a show of it. Set up a small fire ring, pulled out a can of chili, even whistled as I cooked, though my mouth was too dry to carry a tune. I needed to act like I was okay, because I didn't know what would happen if I didn't dash it. That night, I didn't sleep inside. I know how that sounds. But after the knocking at Briar Glen, I couldn't take the claustrophobia. I pulled my sleeping bag outside and laid it just beneath the awning, beside the fire. I kept the axe close. I told myself it was bravery. Deep down, I knew it was blood. I wanted, whatever this was, to show itself, because the waiting was worse than the knowing. Around 3 a.m., I heard something breathing. It wasn't close. Not at first, just the faint rhythmic draw of lungs in the dark. Inhale, Exhale. Like a large animal standing just inside the tree line, hidden by the brush but making no effort to mask itself. I sat up slowly, heart pounding in my throat. My hand reached for the axe handle, but I didn't lift it. The fire had gone to coals, but the embers glowed enough to cast a soft red halo around the clearing. The breathing didn't stop. I scanned the darkness. Nothing moved, but I felt it. Then a crunch of leaves, another, closer. I stood. The axe felt absurdly small in my hand. "Who's there?" I called. The breathing paused. Then a whisper, not from the forest, but from behind me. Not off the trail. I spun around, raising the axe. No one. Nothing behind me but the side of the RV, shimmering faintly in moonlight. The breath caught in my throat. My skin turned to ice. It wasn't just that the voice was close. It was the tone, something between a warning and a plea, like a mother hissing at her child to hide. I backed toward the RV door, trying not to make a sound, and then I saw it, a figure at the edge of the trees. It wasn't fully visible, just the outline of something tall and thin, maybe 7 feet, with arms that hung low and still. No eyes, no movement, just the shape, as if someone had cut a hole in the forest, and that void had taken form. I blinked. It was gone. I didn't sleep. I didn't even go inside. I stood with my back to the RV until dawn, axe in hand, legs trembling so badly I thought I'd collapse. But nothing came closer. Nothing attacked. At sunrise, I walked into the woods. I didn't have a reason. I just knew the trail ran behind Flat Rock, and whatever this was, it was tied to it. Maybe it was madness. Maybe it was instinct. But something in me whispered that the trail wasn't just a path. It was a line, a rule, and something waited for me to break it. I hiked 2 miles before I found the marker. It wasn't official, just a wooden plank nailed to a tree, faded and cracked, but clearly placed with intention. It read, "Past this point, none return unchanged." I laughed. Out loud, a short, bitter sound, probably a joke, some Appalachian hiker humor. But then I heard the same voice from the radio, now echoing in my head. "Stay on the trail." I turned around, but something stopped me. There were footprints behind me, fresh ones. My boots had left faint imprints in the soft dirt, but beside them, another set had appeared. Bare feet, long, narrow, with toes that stretched like they didn't belong to any human I'd ever seen. They walked in perfect sync with mine, but there was only one set behind me. Mine. I looked forward again and realized there were more footprints ahead, leading deeper into the woods. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the RV. My legs moved without permission, crashing through underbrush and catching roots until I spilled into the clearing, scraped and breathless. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, locked everything, and peeled out. Gravel spat behind me. The trees blurred. And for the first time in days, I heard a sound that didn't terrify me. The hum of the engine at full throttle. I didn't stop until I hit a ranger station. It was closed, but there was a payphone mounted outside. I dialed 911, and when the dispatcher answered, I just kept saying one thing over and over. "There's something wrong with the trail." She asked where I was. I gave her what I could. She said she'd send a deputy. I waited in the RV, shaking. Doors locked, windows covered, but no one came for 2 hours. When the deputy finally pulled in, he looked half asleep, like this was just another call. I told him what I saw. He didn't laugh, but he didn't write anything down either. "You've been near Briar Glen?" he asked, frowning. "Place isn't even listed anymore. Locals stopped using it after, well, a while." "After what?" I asked. He didn't answer, just tapped his notepad and said, "Sometimes people go too far, off trail, get turned around, lose pieces of themselves." That's when I asked him directly, "What does it mean when the forest feels alive?" He gave me a long look, not pitying, just tired. "Means you noticed." He left after that. No report, no follow-up. I didn't sleep for days, but I didn't leave the mountains either. I didn't leave the mountains because something in me refused to accept that this was just a scare. I'd done enough camping, traveled enough miles in this rig, to know fear from delusion. And this wasn't fear. Not only. It was recognition. Like something in the woods had clocked me the moment I arrived, and now it was waiting. So I drove. I stayed on the paved roads near the edge of the national forest for 2 nights, sleeping in daylight, driving at dusk. I passed other campers, families unloading coolers and folding chairs like they'd never heard the warnings. I thought about stopping to tell them, just walk up to someone and say, hey, if you hear breathing in the dark, don't answer it. But that's the thing, isn't it? No one ever listens until it's them. By the 3rd night, I found myself near a trailhead called Hollow Bend. The name didn't ring any bells, but the parking lot was empty. There were no rangers, no other RVs, just a narrow gravel path that cut into the trees like a wound. I knew better, but I parked anyway. I couldn't explain it, why I felt drawn to it. It wasn't compulsion. It wasn't curiosity. It felt like gravity, like the land was gently tilting and I was just following the angle down. I didn't go hiking. I just stayed parked, kept the doors locked, cooked in silence, tried to write about it, what I'd seen, what I'd felt, but the words turned to ash in my mouth. And that night, just after midnight, I heard it again. The knock. Not on the door this time, on the window. Just 3 soft raps, barely audible over the wind. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then came a voice, but it wasn't from outside. It came from the back of the RV, from the small storage compartment under the bed where I kept tools and spare cables. A voice inside. I was lost too. I turned so fast I nearly fell. My flashlight shook in my grip. I moved to the back, trembling, and yanked the compartment open. Nothing, but there were scratches on the inside of the panel. Dozens of them, thin and shallow, like made by fingernails. A spiral pattern, over and over, dragging outward from the center. My breath fogged the air. It was summer. The inside of the RV should have been warm, but it felt like winter had sunk into the walls. The knocking started again, now on the roof. I snapped, climbed onto the roof with my flashlight and axe. I expected a raccoon, like maybe a person, something I could fight or scream at. Nothing. Just cold steel and quiet stars overhead. I stood there alone until dawn, and that's when I saw the footprints. Not on the roof, on the ground. They circled the RV, a full loop, bare feet, the same long, distorted shape I'd seen back near Flat Rock. But these weren't fresh, they were frozen, outlined in frost. By noon, I'd convinced myself to leave again. I told myself it was over, that maybe I was sleep-deprived, that maybe I'd imagined the voice in the storage panel, that maybe, just maybe, I'd picked up something on the radio that my brain turned into words. But that was a lie. Because that night, I started driving south. Fast. I just wanted out of the mountains, out of Appalachia. I figured if I could reach Asheville, I could take a hotel, ditch the RV for a while, clear my head. But around dusk, I noticed something strange. The road signs were wrong. I passed a marker for a place called Crow's Hollow. I thought it was strange. I didn't remember passing that on the way up, but it looked legitimate. Then I passed another, Witch Tree Ridge. Then another, Briar Glen. Again, I hit the brakes, hard. I'd driven over 100 miles south, but somehow I was back, right near where it started. I checked my GPS, no signal. I pulled over, heart in my throat, and stepped out. That same air greeted me again. Pine sap and rot and something older, something colder. I looked around. There were no sounds, no birds, no crickets, just the trees breathing. And then I realized something else. The forest didn't look the same anymore. Not exactly. It was warped. Branches bent in impossible angles, trunks leaning in as if listening. I saw a tree growing into itself, roots looped around its own base, like it had tried to flee and failed. Moss grew upside down. Rocks had been stacked into small pyramids along the roadside. It was the same place, but it had changed. Or I had. I slammed the door shut, threw the RV into reverse, turned around and punched the gas. But no matter which road I took, I ended up back at that same pull-off. Briar Glen, Flat Rock, Hollow Bend. The signs changed, the trees didn't. The forest wasn't in Appalachia anymore. It was Appalachia, and I was in it. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat behind the wheel, like headlights off, trying not to blink. Around 3 a.m., the knocking came again, this time from inside the walls, from behind the paneling, and I swear to God, I swear on my own mother's grave, I saw fingers reach through the vent above the stove. Thin, gray, Jointed too many times. They didn't grab, they waved slowly, like they knew I wouldn't leave, like they knew I couldn't. I couldn't cry. I wanted to. I kept waiting for the scream to rise up in my throat and break me open. But it didn't. Instead, I sat there, paralyzed, staring at those fingers through the vent until they slipped back into the wall like smoke pulled by a draft. They didn't make a sound. That silence hurt worse than any scream ever could. At dawn, I started walking. I left the RV where it sat, engine off, keys still in the ignition. Maybe I hoped the forest would take it instead of me. Maybe I thought leaving would break whatever loop I'd fallen into. Either way, I walked, back along the trailhead, past the Briar Glen sign, up a path that didn't exist on any map. I told myself I wasn't afraid anymore. But that was a lie, too. What I really felt was hollow, like fear had drained everything else. And now I was just a body, moving forward, because backward wasn't an option. There was no trail, just the shape of one. A ghost of a path, as if it had once been used and abandoned 100 years ago. About 2 hours in, I found something strange. A clearing, perfectly round. The trees didn't grow in it, not even weeds. In the center was a single stump, blackened and flat-topped like it had been used for something, ritual maybe, or worse. And on the edge of that stump, carved deep into the wood, were the words, "Turn around." I should have listened. But when I did turn, finally reluctantly, I saw that the trail behind me was gone, erased. Trees had grown where I just walked. Branches wove together in a tight wall of green like the forest had sewn itself shut. And I wasn't alone. I heard it first. That breathing again, wet, rhythmic, inhuman. Then a voice, not like the one in the vent. This one was deeper, older. It came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It didn't speak words. It pressed thoughts into my head like thumbs into soft earth. And those thoughts weren't mine. They didn't feel like suggestions. They felt like orders. Stay. Kneel. Forget. I fell to my knees, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stand anymore. My legs shook, my chest seized. I felt my memories slipping sideways, names, dates, my mother's voice. It all got harder to hold on to, like it was being pulled out by invisible hands. And then I saw it, not clearly, not in the daylight, but in the space between the trees, in the wrongness of the shadows. Something stood there, tall, too tall, its head bent low to avoid the canopy. It didn't move, just watched, and its face, I'll never forget it, because it was mine, my face, my eyes, my jaw, but distorted like something had seen me once, remembered the shape, and recreated it wrong. Too many teeth, wrong color eyes, skin like paper soaked through, and it smiled. The same twisted grin that had followed me from the firelight, the same one I'd seen in the reflection back at the stream. It stepped forward once. The ground cracked under its weight. And in that instant, something broke inside me. Some final, primal instinct that screamed, run. I bolted through the underbrush, snapping branches, cutting my arms on thorns I couldn't see. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. And when I collapsed, I was back on the road. Just like that. No footsteps behind me, no eyes in the trees, only the sound of cars in the distance. Civilization. Life. The world I remembered. My RV was there too, parked at the shoulder, right where I'd left it. I never found that clearing again. Tried a few weeks later, brought a ranger, showed him the area, but the signs were different. The trees were younger. The trailhead was blocked off, marked with a rusted-out sign that read "Trail closed, unsafe conditions." When I asked what happened there, the ranger just shook his head and said, "We don't go past Hollow Bend anymore. Too many people went missing in the 80s. Never found bodies, just their gear." That night, I drove 300 miles west. Didn't stop, didn't eat. Just kept going until the trees stopped leaning in and the stars stopped looking back. And here's the truth, the one I've avoided saying aloud until now. I think something left with me. Maybe not the thing I saw in the woods. Maybe not the face in the trees, but something smaller, a seed, a whisper, an echo. Because sometimes, late at night when I park somewhere quiet and kill the engine, I hear breathing inside the RV, coming from under the floor, and it sounds like me. There's something about hearing your own voice where it shouldn't be. I don't mean a recording. I don't mean an echo. I mean your voice speaking from a place your mouth isn't, speaking from under the floorboards when you're alone in the dark, speaking in your tone, your inflection, your hesitation, but saying things you've never said. That's what it became, night after night, wherever I parked. I could pick a Walmart lot in the middle of Kansas or a scenic pullout in Colorado. It didn't matter. Once the engine cut and the night crept in, the breathing would start, and then the voice. It didn't say much at first, just my name, just the words stay, like it was still there, waiting, still echoing from that hollow space in the Appalachian woods. I tried to rationalize it, told myself I'd hit my head, that I'd experienced trauma and my mind was reaching for shape and meaning in the silence. I bought earplugs, I took sleeping pills, I tried camping next to other RVs just to hear life around me, but nothing stopped it. And then it escalated. The voice started asking questions, always at night, always in the stillness, never more than a few syllables. But it knew things I'd never said aloud. It knew what my father looked like when he got sick. It knew the exact number of stitches I'd had in my right knee from falling off the deck when I was 10. It repeated the words my ex had shouted the night she left, words I'd buried so deep I could barely really remember them myself, and it said them in my voice like it was trying to become me. That was when I stopped driving at night, started keeping the RV moving during daylight, and only sleeping in motels. Abandoned the idea of camping altogether, left my gear in storage, changed my phone number, deleted the forums, but the silence followed me anyway. I started seeing it in mirrors, something wrong in the reflection, just for a second. A jaw that didn't match mine, a blink that came too slow, a grin that held on a fraction too long. I caught it once, took a photo in a gas station bathroom, one of those harshly lit stalls where everything smells like bleach and stale air. I looked down at my phone, and there it was, my face. But the pupils were missing, just black holes, like the eyes had been scooped clean. I deleted the picture, threw the phone out the window on I-40 somewhere near Amarillo. I haven't carried one since. But it wasn't just me anymore. Other people started noticing. A woman at a truck stop asked if I was okay. She said she saw me walk past her twice, once heading into the diner and again 2 minutes later in the opposite direction. I told her she was mistaken, that I'd only just arrived. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Then why was the other you smiling?" I left my plate half-eaten and didn't stop driving until sunrise. The worst was the night I stayed in that rundown motel just outside Nashville. It was the kind of place where the lights buzz and the front desk clerk doesn't make eye contact. But it was cheap, and I was exhausted, and I thought maybe a real bed would help. I turned on the old TV, lay back, and drifted off. When I woke, the room was pitch black. The power had gone out, but the TV was still on, not the screen, just the sound. It was playing a voice, my voice, telling a story I'd never told, talking about things I'd never done. And I swear to you, it was describing my death. It was calm, matter of fact, like a documentary. And it described in detail how I would walk into a forest, lay down and let the earth take me, how my breath would slow, how my eyes would stay open, even after. I unplugged the damn TV, threw my bag over my shoulder, and walked right out the front door in my socks. Didn't even check out. But even on the highway, even under bright blue sky, I couldn't shake the feeling, like I'd already died. And something else was driving. I kept thinking back to the face in the trees, the wrong version of me. The thing that smiled like it had never felt pain, like it had watched humanity from behind a curtain and only wore my face like a coat. And I wondered, what if that thing never left? What if it followed me out of the Appalachian Trail, not by walking, but by stepping into me? Like a shell, like a parasite. What if it isn't whispering from the dark anymore? What if it's already inside? I looked in the mirror that morning, roadside, sun rising behind me, and I watched my reflection smile before I did. That was when I stopped trusting the glass, stopped trusting myself. I kept driving across state lines, through deserts and forests, past cities and truck stops and national parks. But no matter how far I went, it was always there, waiting, just behind the veil of what I understood. A hitchhiker I never picked up, a reflection I never invited, a voice in my throat, waiting for me to sleep. And here's the thing I hate admitting the most. Sometimes I forget who I was before the trail, not the name or the face. That's still mine, but the center, the thing inside that says, this is me, this is mine, this is real. Sometimes when I laugh, I don't know if the joy is mine or something else's performance. Sometimes when I speak to strangers, I feel like I'm watching from behind glass, mouthing words someone else already wrote. And sometimes when I'm really quiet, I hear breathing that isn't mine, coming from just behind my ears, right at the base of the skull, like it's learning me, like it's practicing. I don't know exactly when I stopped being afraid of it and started being afraid of me. That's the most honest thing I can say now. The line between what followed me and what I am, it's thinner than paper, and every day I wonder if I've already crossed it. There was one last time I went back. I told myself it was for closure, to face it, to prove to myself that it was just a place, just a forest, just a coincidence of sound and shadow and trauma. But deep down I knew, you don't go back to something like that unless part of you belongs to it. It had been over a year. I hadn't spoken to Alex or Ben since I abandoned them on the side of the road that morning. Never answered their calls, never responded to the email Alex sent titled, "Are you okay?" I just couldn't. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know what would answer if I said hello. I took the old route in reverse, starting in Georgia and heading north. I stopped at familiar campgrounds, recognizing a turn of the trees here, the rusted picnic tables there. Everything felt like it had been waiting for me. Even the air had that smell again, that thick, cold sweetness like decaying moss and burnt matches. But there were no people. None. Not in the lots, not in the trailheads, not even rangers. I didn't see a single soul once I crossed into that section near Fontana Dam, the exact stretch we'd been when everything changed. Just empty tents, abandoned chairs, a half-eaten granola bar rotting in a cup holder, like they'd all gotten up at once and walked into the trees. There was a weight in the silence. Not just loneliness, expectation. Something wanted me there. I didn't camp, didn't light a fire, just parked the van, locked every door, and sat behind the wheel with my hands shaking in my lap. My breath was fogging up the glass. My heart was hammering. And then I heard it, a knock. Not at the door, not at the window, but from under the van. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, like knuckles against steel. I couldn't move. My skin felt like paper stretched too tight. My ears started ringing, and I thought for a moment that I'd lost time again, just like I did that first night. But I hadn't, because the knocking came again. Only this time it wasn't from below. It was from the back of the van, inside. That's when I remembered something I hadn't thought about in months. Something I had buried under all my effort to move on. The RV had a storage hatch under the rear bed, one that could only be opened from the inside. And it was open. I don't remember standing, don't remember turning. All I know is I looked slowly toward the rear compartment and saw the hatch door hanging wide, shadows dripping from the opening like oil, and 2 fingers. Not hands, just fingers, clutching the edge of the hatch. They were long, thin, and pale. They looked like they'd never touched sunlight, never held a tool, never gripped anything real, just curled there, twitching slightly like they were testing the air, like they were deciding. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my chest. And then, before I could even blink, the fingers slid out of sight, and I heard my voice again, from inside the hatch, saying, "Are you ready now?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I opened the door, stumbled out of the van barefoot, and ran. Just ran. I didn't care about my phone, my keys, my shoes. I ran through the forest like a madman, crashing through brush and roots, cutting my feet on stones, until my lungs gave out and I collapsed by a stream. I lay there, trembling as the trees leaned over me, and for the first time in my life I wept, not because I was scared, but because I realized something I hadn't wanted to believe. I'd never left. Not really. Part of me had been here the whole time. Since that first night on the trail, since the thing whispered my name in my own breath and the fire died without wind, I don't know what it took from me, but it left a hole. And every day since, I've been trying to fill that hole with noise and movement and cities and light, but the silence always catches up, because the trail doesn't just haunt you, it remakes you. It waits until your soul softens from fatigue, until your instincts are numb, until your mind is too tired to fight, and then it invites itself in. It doesn't want to kill you. It wants to live through you, to see the world through your eyes, speak through your lips, mimic your joy, your grief, your rage, until one day the people you love say you've changed, that your laugh isn't the same, that you seem distant, and maybe one day they'll stop calling you by your name because they'll see what's really standing there, and it won't be you. I don't camp anymore. I don't hike. I don't take back roads. I don't follow blue blazes into the woods. I keep the lights on at all times, and I never ever answer when I hear my voice in the dark, because I know what it is now, and I know what it wants. It's patient, it's watching, and it's waiting for me to forget. I stayed in a motel off the highway for 3 nights after that. Didn't leave the room, didn't shower, didn't sleep. The woman at the front desk knocked once to ask if I needed anything, and I almost broke down just hearing the sound. I told her I had food. I told her I was fine. I lied. The truth is, I didn't know if I had brought it back with me. I didn't know if it had ever left. That's the thing nobody tells you about encountering something wrong in the woods. It doesn't stop at the tree line. It follows, not like a shadow behind you, but like a seed inside you. It doesn't chase you. It waits for you to rot. On the 4th day, I left the keys to the van on the motel bed and took a bus home. I didn't look back. I never saw the van again. I moved in with my brother for a while, back in the city. I told him I'd gotten into an accident that I needed to reset. He offered support, no questions asked like brothers do. But I could see it in his face. He didn't recognize me anymore. Not really. I'd come back quieter, flatter. He said I looked worn down. I wanted to tell him everything. About the fire, the blood, the voices in the wind, the second version of me that walked into the woods that night and never came back. But how do you tell someone that the forest kept your reflection? He wouldn't have believed me anyway. Hell, I barely believed myself, and I lived it. Months passed, then a year. I started walking again, slowly, never more than a block or 2. I avoided anything with trees. I'd cross the street just to avoid a row of hedges. Then one day I heard something on the news. A hiker had gone missing in the southern Appalachians. Then another. Then 3 at once. No signs of struggle. No equipment left behind. Just gone. And I knew. I knew it had opened again. And I knew that whatever it was still hungry. They'll blame exposure, terrain, bad luck. That's what they always do. Nobody wants to believe that the earth itself can turn against you, that it can remember you, that it can watch. But it does. I felt it. I feel it still, in crowds, in quiet, in mirrors when I catch a flash of myself and see the wrong expression looking back, like something's trying to remind me that I'm not whole, that I left something behind, that I brought something back. There are moments, brief, terrifying moments when I don't remember where I am. I'll be in a grocery store blinking at a row of cereal boxes and then, snap, I'm back on that trail. I hear my voice echoing from the dark. Are you ready now? And sometimes I answer, not out loud, just in my bones, because I know I'll go back. I don't want to, but I will. That's how the trail works. It calls the broken ones, the lost ones, the ones who think they're getting away from something. But it's not escape, it's exchange. You give it your silence, your memories, your fear, and it gives you the version of yourself that will survive it. But that version doesn't come home. It's the one that stays, smiling, walking, whispering. And the one that returns, it's never quite you. So if you're hearing this, and you're thinking about camping deep in the woods, about boondocking off-grid somewhere along the Appalachian spine, where the trees crowd the road and the sky disappears and time stretches thin, remember this. Some places don't want to be found. Some trails weren't made for walking, and and some doors, once opened, will never close again. Make sure you know which version of yourself you're bringing into the wild, because that may not be the version that comes back out. I should have listened to my gut the second we pulled into the gravel lot, but it was late and we were tired, and the map had said Scenic Vista Campground was one of the only safe pull-ins for miles. Maybe that's why I ignored it. That soft, twitching nerve behind the sternum that tightens when something's wrong, but your brain hasn't caught up yet. That whisper in the blood that says, don't stay here. Don't let the van cool down. Don't turn off the lights. But I did. I turned the ignition key, and the old Volkswagen hummed to a stop. The quiet that followed felt wrong. Not peaceful, hollow. Like the air had been scooped out of the space around us, and we were now parked in the shell of some dead thing. My girlfriend, Erin, was already twisting her hair into a bun, saying she was going to find the bathrooms. I just sat there a moment longer, gripping the steering wheel like I wasn't quite ready to let go of motion, as if stopping meant we'd committed to something we couldn't reverse. We were halfway through a trip that was supposed to clear our heads. 6 weeks across the western U.S., from Washington to New Mexico and back, camping wherever the sky looked open and cheap. We'd had our share of weird spots already. A guy who wandered out of the trees in Montana muttering about skinwalkers, a foggy night near Lake Tahoe when the stars blinked out like someone dimmed a stage light, but nothing that really stuck with me. Nothing that stayed after we pulled away. This place, I felt it the minute the tires hit the gravel. Not like we were being watched. More like we'd driven into something else's memory, and it remembered us before we even stopped. The camp host came out from behind the main building just as Aaron disappeared into the trees. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, maybe 15 feet away, with that plastic camp host vest zipped to his throat and his hands behind his back, grinning like he was already part of our evening. I raised my hand in a half wave. "Hey there, just the two of us tonight? You got a spot?" The man nodded slowly. His face barely moved. Only the mouth stretched tight in a grin that never touched his eyes. And God, those eyes. They didn't blink. Not when he nodded, not when he turned, not once while he led me down the path to the fire ring and pointed toward a crooked wooden post with the number 12 carved in it. He never blinked, and he never stopped smiling. "This one's good?" I asked, trying to stay polite. He tilted his head, smile frozen. I gave a soft, awkward chuckle. "Right, we'll take it." He kept standing there while I walked back to the van, not staring at me exactly, just present. Like he didn't have anywhere else to be. Like we were the ones who'd wandered into his time, and he was waiting for us to understand that. Erin returned with a frown on her face. "Bathrooms are locked. Padlocked, actually. You see anyone?" Camp host showed me our site. She glanced toward the man, still half visible through the trees. "What's his deal?" I shrugged. "Smiles a lot." That night, the wind barely moved, but the trees creaked like they were straining against something. I set up the fire ring while Aaron pulled our sleeping bags from the van. We cooked hot dogs, shared a few beers, and tried to pretend the weirdness would wear off with a little warmth. But every time I glanced up the path, I could still see him, not doing anything. Just there, watching the flicker of our fire like it meant something to him. "He's still out there," Aaron whispered at one point. "He's not even pretending to leave." I nodded, tossing another log onto the fire. Maybe he's just lonely. Then why does it feel like he's waiting for something? We didn't talk much after that. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up just past 3 a.m. to the sound of slow footsteps on gravel. Not shuffling, measured, unhurried, like whoever it was had all the time in the world. I reached for the flashlight and held my breath. The steps stopped right outside the van. I didn't move. Neither did Erin. I could tell from her breathing, too shallow, too even, that she was awake too. Through the tinted glass of the back window, I could just barely make out a silhouette. The camp host, standing with his hands folded in front of him, grinning at the van like he was waiting for it to open. Still no blinking. Still no sound but that of the trees leaning into each other. We lay there, not moving, not speaking, not even daring to whisper. He stood there for nearly an hour. When the sun started to rise and color crept into the shadows, I finally sat up. He was gone. Erin turned toward me slowly, her eyes wide and unfocused. "Did you sleep at all?" I asked. She shook her head. "He smiled the whole night. I watched him." "What?" I looked through the curtain. He didn't know I was awake. He just stood there, smiling, all night. He never even blinked. Something inside me tightened. My throat went dry. "You're sure?" She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. His mouth never changed, and he didn't move. It was like he wasn't real. We decided to pack up immediately. No breakfast, no coffee, just gear in the van and get out. I stepped outside to take down the leveling blocks, and that's when I noticed the footprints. They circled the van, not once, not twice, but over a dozen times. Deep, deliberate prints in the gravel, like someone pacing around and around us while we slept, or didn't sleep. And at every pause between circles, just outside the driver's door, just below the back window, there were small, flat indentations. Like the camp host had been standing there, watching, not just for a minute, but long enough to press down the earth. I didn't tell Erin about those. We were already shaken. No need to add weight to her fear, but that feeling was back, that heavy, crawling certainty that we weren't just being watched, we were being studied, like he wanted to see what we'd do next. We pulled out of Scenic Vista Campground before the sun had fully risen. The morning light was pale and directionless, as if even the sky wasn't sure what time it was. I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror more than I should have, watching the trees thin out behind us, watching the road curve away from the forest, waiting for some final sign that he was still there. But we didn't see him. Not then. We drove for nearly an hour before either of us spoke. Erin had her knees pulled up to her chest, face pale, mouth tight. I kept thinking about the footprints, those long, deliberate arcs around the van. That's not curiosity. That's ritual. That's patience sharpened into obsession. He was trying to figure something out, I muttered, not realizing I'd said it out loud. Erin looked over slowly. "What?" I shook my head. "Nothing. Just tired." She went quiet again, but her silence wasn't sleep. It was the kind you fall into when your mind is chewing on something too big to swallow. We pulled into a diner in a place called Wright's Hollow, just a speck of a town tucked into the folds of eastern Oregon. The coffee was burnt, the eggs overcooked, but it felt real, solid, like we were waking up from something. That campground already felt like a fever dream, something our brains had exaggerated in the dark. That's how the mind works, right? Darkness stretches things. Maybe the host was just weird. Maybe he didn't sleep much. Maybe the footprints were old. We both wanted that to be true. Erin picked at her toast and said, "Let's just avoid state parks for a while." I nodded. Agreed. We took the long route south, chasing warmer weather. 3 nights in a well-lit KOA did a lot to settle our nerves. There were kids riding bikes, retirees grilling under awnings, dogs barking at squirrels, the mundane rhythm of campground life. That's the thing about fear. It's a parasite. It can't live in sunlight and laughter. For a little while, we convinced ourselves that Scenic Vista had just been a strange glitch, a human oddity, nothing more. Then on the 4th night, we saw him again. Different campground, different state. Same man. He was standing near the registration board just off the entrance road. Same tan vest. Same unmoving hands folded neatly in front of him. Same fixed grin. And God help me, same eyes, unblinking. I hit the brakes so hard our coffee mugs toppled over. Erin gasped, already reaching for the curtain to hide behind. "Is that—" "It can't be," I said, but my voice cracked. "There's no way. We're in California. He couldn't have." I didn't wait for logic. I threw the van into reverse, backed halfway down the gravel entry, and turned so hard the tires skidded against loose rock. I didn't look back. Not even once. I just drove until the sun dipped below the horizon and the orange faded into bruised purples and dark, shivering blues. That night, we parked at a highway rest stop with blinking security lights and rumbling semis. We didn't even sleep inside the van. We sat up in the front seats with the engine running and the doors locked. Erin didn't cry, but her eyes were red by morning. I saw his teeth, she said, finally. When we passed him, they weren't normal. I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? I'd seen them too. Perfect rows of white, too even to be real. Too many, maybe. They looked artificial, like a smile carved from porcelain. We tried calling the ranger's office for Scenic Vista. The number rang, but no one picked up. I tried to explain to the woman at a general info line that we'd encountered a suspicious man posing as a camp host, but she sounded confused. Said Scenic Vista had been shut down 2 years ago due to structural erosion and weather damage. No one was stationed there. No registered employees, no volunteers. I thanked her and hung up. I didn't tell Erin that part. I didn't want to see her face when she heard it. The more we tried to move on, the more he seemed to find us. Not every night, not even every week. But just when the tension faded, just when we started to feel safe, we'd catch a glimpse, through the trees at dusk, at the edge of a group campsite, in the rearview mirror standing beside a distant trail marker, never speaking, never blinking, just smiling. Each time he looked identical, like time hadn't touched him, like he hadn't eaten or slept or changed posture since we left Oregon. We started sleeping in Walmart parking lots, staying in motels when we could afford it. But no matter how far we drove, the fear drove with us. It stopped being about what he was doing. It became about why. Why us? What did he want? We even talked about turning back, going home, ending the trip. But home had started to feel like an illusion. We weren't the same people anymore. Erin had stopped taking photos. I stopped journaling. The van, our little escape pod, started to feel like a coffin on wheels, a moving target. We didn't talk about it, but we both knew it. Something had followed us out of Scenic Vista, whether it was a man or a thing wearing a man's skin or something older that had learned to act human. We didn't know, but it had chosen us, and it wasn't going to stop. We were somewhere near Flagstaff when the van's alternator gave out. It was around midnight, and the desert air had dropped hard, one of those cold snaps that creeps in quick and makes everything brittle. The headlights dimmed, the dashboard flickered, and then the engine stuttered like it had forgotten how to breathe. I coasted us onto the shoulder, gravel crunching beneath the tires, then silence. "Tell me this is just the battery," Erin whispered. I popped the hood, tried to fake confidence, but as soon as I saw the dim orange glow of the warning light, I knew we weren't going anywhere that night. We had no cell service. The road was dead quiet. No headlights in either direction. The world felt abandoned. We climbed into the back of the van, pulled the curtains shut, and tried to wait for morning. I didn't want to admit how bad my gut felt. Erin was curled up in her sleeping bag, but I knew she wasn't asleep. Her breathing was shallow, alert, like an animal waiting for a predator to pass. Then, just after 2 a.m., the tapping started. Not loud, just the softest touch against the rear window. A rhythmic, deliberate knock, like the tip of a nail, testing. Erin sat up, her eyes locked on mine. No words. I didn't move. I couldn't. The knock came again. Then again. 3 beats, same timing, same patience, then silence. I reached out slowly, grabbed the baseball bat I kept beneath the bed. I mouthed, "Stay here," slid the side door open as quietly as I could, the cold air flooding in, biting at my arms. I stepped out into the dark. Nothing. Just sand, scrub, the glint of frost on distant rocks, no cars, no wind. But the smell, it hit me then. Not a natural desert scent. Something sour, like rotting plastic left too long in the sun. Like a school janitor's closet full of chemicals masking something worse. I circled the van, keeping low, the bat tight in my grip. That's when I saw it. Right beneath the rear window. A perfect set of footprints. Not boot prints. Bare feet. Long, too long, toes slightly arched in the dirt. He hadn't just walked up. He'd stood there. For a while. Watching. That's when I heard Erin scream. I ran back around, heart choking me, yanked the door open. She was pointing at the windshield. Fog. A perfect handprint. Inside the glass. She hadn't opened the cab. Neither had I. That handprint hadn't come from us. I turned and swung the bat wildly at nothing, heart pounding out of rhythm, lungs on fire. I don't even remember getting back in the van, just locking every door, grabbing the keys, praying for some miracle that would bring the engine back to life. And somehow it turned over. Weak at first, then stronger. I threw it in gear and drove. Didn't care where. Didn't care if we shredded the tires on a nail field. I just needed to move. We made it to a Love's truck stop 2 hours later, parked under the brightest sodium lights we could find, sat in the front seats until dawn. Neither of us spoke. We knew now. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a man with too much time. This wasn't a stranger playing games. He was inside the van, or had been. We changed after that, quietly without even talking about it. Like trauma that hardens without ever healing. Aaron started researching folklore. I started checking the van every night, vents, cabinets, even inside the spare tire well. We stopped calling him the camp host. That felt too human. Aaron called him the grinner, said she'd read stories, old ones, about entities that mimic people, that find cracks in your mind and pry their way in, ones that wear familiarity like clothing. They fixate, follow, attach themselves. Sometimes, she whispered, they choose a face just for you. The worst part, I'd started dreaming of him, but not the version from Scenic Vista. A different one that looked like me. Same height, same hands, same voice, just smiling, always smiling. In the dream, he stands just outside the van, watching me sleep, and when I wake up, I feel like I've just blinked, not slept, like something else was using my body while I was gone. We started losing time, not hours, not days, just moments, but enough to notice. I'd reach for my mug, and it'd already be empty. Erin would forget parts of the drive she swore she'd just seen. Once, I found my shoes full of sand, and I hadn't stepped out of the van in 2 days. Something was bleeding through. The real world and whatever he was made of, whatever he came from, they were touching now, and we were in the middle of it. It wasn't just the camping anymore. We could have parked in a hotel parking lot, surrounded by people, and I still would have felt it, that he was near, waiting, smiling. We tried going home, packed everything up in one morning, drove 12 straight hours west without stopping. No more national forests, no more dry camping, just paved roads, fast food, and civilization. Anything that felt like it could drown out what had followed us. When we got back to Aaron's apartment outside of Temecula, we crashed. For a full day, we didn't leave the couch, ordered food, watched old comedies, tried pretending nothing had happened, that we were normal again. But the van was still parked out front, and I couldn't stop checking the windows. There's a kind of tension that doesn't ease. It just shifts shape. That's what those few days felt like. The pressure didn't leave us. It just put on a new mask, brighter lights, more distractions. But the fear was still there, crouched in the background, patient. On the third night, the power went out. No wind, no rain, no warning, just total blackout, like the world had blinked. Aaron lit candles. I grabbed a flashlight. We looked at each other, and without saying it, we both thought the same thing. He found us again. I stepped out to check the breaker panel behind the building. That's when I noticed the van's headlights were on, but I didn't leave them on. We hadn't even driven it since we got back. I walked toward it, heart tight in my chest, flashlight flicking across the hood. The windshield was fogged from the inside. My reflection looked warped. I opened the door slowly. The driver's seat was reclined all the way back, and in the passenger seat was a single black feather. I backed away, fast, turned to run back inside, and through the apartment window, I saw Aaron, standing, staring, at me, but not at me, through me, unblinking, expressionless, just like him. I ran, burst back through the door, heart exploding, yelling her name. She was on the couch, curled up, half asleep. "What's wrong?" she mumbled. I looked at her, then back at the window. Nobody was there. She hadn't moved, but I know what I saw. And from that moment forward, I couldn't trust anything anymore. Not what I heard, not what I saw, not even what I remembered. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw that damn smile. And every time I opened them, I felt like I'd missed something, like a page had been ripped from the middle of my life without explanation. We thought maybe we'd shaken him. Maybe we just needed more time. Maybe his reach had limits. But what if it was never about place? What if it was about us, about me? Erin tried grounding rituals, salt lines, sage smudging. She said it wasn't about religion, it was about intention, but nothing changed. I tried driving the van out alone, taking it to the middle of nowhere, screaming at whatever was attached to it. I even slept outside once just to see if he'd follow me or stay with the metal shell he'd infected. But he didn't show himself. Not then. Because the worst part wasn't seeing him anymore. The worst part was not seeing him, and still knowing he was there. We kept trying to live normal lives, worked remote gigs, went to farmers markets, smiled at baristas. But every mirror became suspect. Every silence stretched too long. Then one night, it escalated. We were asleep, dead asleep, and the fire alarm went off, shrill, piercing, jerking us upright. I ran to the kitchen, no smoke, no fire, and when I turned back to the bedroom, Erin was gone. The sheets were still warm. The door hadn't opened. I searched every room. Nothing. Called out her name until my voice cracked, ran outside barefoot, blood rushing in my ears, and there, at the end of the block, stood the van. Running. Lights on. Side door open, like it was inviting me. I sprinted so hard my lungs tore. Reached the van, expecting the worst, but it was empty. Engine humming, lights steady, and Erin was sitting on the ground behind it, shivering, knees tucked to her chest, staring into nothing. "He let me go," she whispered. That's all she said. For hours, she didn't blink, just stared. When she finally spoke again, it broke something inside me. "I think he's getting bored," she said, voice flat. "I think he wants more." We stopped sleeping after that. Not because we didn't want to, because we couldn't. The silence between midnight and 4 a.m. became a hunting ground for something neither of us could name. Erin would sit with her back to the wall, knees pulled in, eyes darting to the corners of the ceiling like she was watching for cracks that might split open. And I stopped trusting the dark entirely. Even our shadows looked wrong, longer than they should be. Bending in directions the light wasn't pointing. Sometimes I'd catch her whispering into a corner, not chanting, not praying, just whispering, like she was negotiating. I asked her once what she was saying. She looked at me like I'd asked her how to breathe. "You can't talk to him," she said. "You just have to make it seem like you're listening." I didn't press. By the second week, the van wouldn't start unless both of us touched it at the same time. I wish that was metaphorical. It wasn't. We'd turn the key and nothing would happen. But if we stood beside each other, skin to metal, engine turned over like normal, smooth, cooperative, eager. We should have ditched it. We knew that. But it wasn't just a van anymore. It was an anchor and a trap. We were both afraid to leave it behind, like it might punish us for trying. That's when the dreams started. And not the symbolic kind, not strange metaphors or echoes of daily fear. These were precise, sharp, like they'd written for us, same dream every night. We were back at that campground, the camp host smiling, standing by the fire just outside the glow, his eyes reflecting light like a coyote's, but too wide, too empty. And in every dream, he was closer. The 5th night, I woke up with dirt under my nails. The 6th, Erin had pine needles in her hair. We hadn't left the apartment in days. We were both losing track of time, of memory, of reality. That's when Erin told me she wanted to go back, to the campground. I thought she was joking at first, just trauma talking. But she was serious. "I think it started there," she said, "and I think it ends there." I fought her on it, hard. But part of me agreed, not because I wanted to, but because there's only so long you can run with something crawling behind your eyes. Eventually, you stop caring where you're going. You just want it over. So we packed, loaded the van, didn't tell anyone. We drove through the night, trying to stay ahead of ourselves. When we reached the dirt road entrance to the campground, my hands started shaking. Erin hadn't spoken for the last 2 hours. The sun was coming up behind us, and that same fog that had rolled in the first night began thickening across the trail, like the place knew we were coming back. When we reached the clearing, everything looked exactly the same. Same dead grass, same rusted water pump, same trees with their bent arms and watching posture. And the host's cabin, still there, unchanged, like it had been waiting. We parked in the same spot as before, didn't say a word, just sat. The van engine idled, and I kept my foot hovering over the brake, unsure if I was going to reverse and bolt or get out and walk into hell. Erin moved first. She opened her door, slow, gentle, like she didn't want to startle something. And then she said, "He'll want us to come to him." I asked her how she knew that, but she didn't answer. She was already walking toward the host's cabin. I got out and followed. My steps felt heavy, like I was moving through something thicker than air. When we reached the porch, we saw the door was open, just a crack. Inside was dark, too dark for morning. I called out, "Hello, we're back." I don't know why I said it like that, like we were old friends, returning guests, but that's what it felt like we were fulfilling something. A silence answered. Then, from the shadows, I know, it was him. Same voice, same cadence, but no body. Not yet, just the smile floating almost white teeth in black air. "I've been so patient," he said. "And now you understand the rules." My throat tightened. Erin reached for my hand and gripped it hard. Then he stepped forward, and for the first time we saw what he really was. Not a man, not a ghost, but something caught in between. Skin that shimmered like bark, eyes like dull, wet stones. And that same damn grin. He looked at Erin. "You're ready," he said. I stepped in front of her. He laughed, not loud, just disappointed. "Always the protector," he said. "That's why I chose you." I shook my head. "We're not here to join you." That smile twitched. "You already have." The door slammed shut behind us. Darkness swallowed the cabin whole, and that's when the screaming started. But it wasn't him. It was us. Because the air, it started changing. Thick. Wet. Electrical, like breathing in static and grave soil. Erin dropped to her knees, clutching her head, muttering something I couldn't hear. I lunged forward, grabbed a lantern from the wall, and smashed it on the floor. Flames caught, and the host? He didn't move, he just watched. Watched as fire curled around the walls, as smoke filled the rafters, as we dragged ourselves back out into the clearing, coughing and gasping and stumbling. And still that cabin didn't burn fast enough. But it did burn. We saw it. We watched it fall. And the smile, it stayed in the flames, watching, even as the wood cracked and collapsed inward. Even as the sky turned pink with morning light, we never saw him blink, but when the fire finally died, he was gone. We didn't speak on the drive home. Not because there wasn't anything to say, but because anything we might have said would have sounded wrong. Hollow. Too small to hold the weight of what we'd seen, what we'd brought back with us. The fire had burned clean through the host's cabin. We stayed long enough to watch the roof cave in, embers swirling like dying stars around the hollow, charred bones of the place. But deep down, we both knew that wasn't going to be enough. Some things don't live in structures. They don't need walls. They nest in people. And we had been excellent hosts. For the first few days after returning home, we tried to believe it was over. Really tried. We cooked meals again, played music, took long, silent walks through the neighborhood. Erin even painted for the first time in months, but her canvases were all wrong. Bleeding shadows, spirals, eyes too wide for any face. She didn't even notice until I pointed it out. "I don't remember painting that," she whispered. Then she locked the room and never went back inside. I wanted to believe it was just trauma, like the therapists always say. Brains protecting themselves with false connections and trick memory. But then the power started cutting out, only between midnight and 4. And the night we tried to leave the van parked at the mechanic's, he called me in a panic at 3 a.m., said something was scratching the walls from inside the shop, said he found teeth marks in the tires, asked if we'd done something wrong out there. I didn't answer because I didn't know how. The van was back in our driveway by morning, running perfectly. Every time I looked at it now, it felt like it was waiting. But the real change, the one that broke both of us, came 3 weeks later. We were parked in the mountains outside Ruidoso, New Mexico, trying to start fresh. Again, off-grid this time. Quiet campground, clean air, away from anything that might have followed. But something had. We heard laughter, just after dusk, coming from behind the tree line. At first, it sounded like kids, then like an old radio, warbly, cheerful, misplaced in time. Then it got closer. Erin sat bolt upright on the fold-out bed and said, "He found us." That's when I saw her eyes. They weren't hers anymore. They were too still, too dry, and wide, too wide. She smiled, not like herself, not like anything human. And in that moment, I realized he hadn't followed us. He'd stayed with her the whole time. I backed away, voice cracking. "Erin?" But she just tilted her head and blinked. Once, then again, and again. Over and over. Too fast, too mechanical. Like a signal, like a glitch. And the smile dropped all at once. Like someone let go of puppet strings. She fell to the floor. I dove down beside her, heart racing, trying to shake her awake. But she was breathing, just not there. Empty eyes, steady rhythm, as if her body had rebooted, but the software hadn't come back online. She stayed like that for hours. When she finally blinked naturally, she looked at me like I was the one who'd vanished. I didn't tell her what I saw. What would I even say? How could I tell the woman I loved that she was wearing someone else's face? We left the next day, started driving without direction. No maps, no apps, just movement. We'd find a place to stop only long enough to sleep or pretend to, and then we'd move again, like sharks in a world we no longer belonged to. I kept hoping that whatever tether existed between us and him would stretch thin enough to snap, but it never did. Not once, because some places don't just haunt you, they mark you, brand you. And some people, things, don't want you dead. They want you open, to let them in, to give them eyes and bones and names they can wear until no one remembers they weren't always there, until they become the camp host, smiling, not blinking, patient, because someone new will come eventually, someone curious, tired, hungry for solitude and stillness, for a break from noise and concrete, and the host will greet them, offer them a fire, a map of the trails, a smile that never falters, and they'll think, what a great little spot. Quiet, undiscovered. They'll laugh at their own luck. They'll ignore the cold. They'll ignore the way the forest leans in at night, and they'll tell their friends how refreshing it was. They might even write a glowing review. But when they return, if they return, they'll never be the same. Just like us. Erin doesn't paint anymore. She just watches the windows, watches the van, watches me. And me? I talk less and sleep even less than that. Because I still hear it sometimes, in the small hours between real and dream, the creak of a porch step, the crunch of gravel under boots, the low, patient voice whispering, "You understand now." And I do. God help me, I do. But knowing doesn't save you. It just means you'll see it coming next time. And that's the final cruelty. You'll still be too late.